Hey my watchers, welcome. Today we are gonna see, what if Harry Potter was raised by Thor and Iron Man? Join Patreon for early access exclusive content of Super Op stories. Also contents that's too far for YouTube. You will get 400 content there, please do check that too. Please subscribe this channel, because definitely I will try my best to provide a valuable content for you all. Also check the description to support the original author for this beautiful creation. He wanted to step out of the closet, but his aunt and uncle wouldn't let him. It was said they hosted very important guests, and his presence would poison their guests. Yet he couldn't help craving to get out for some fresh air or grab something, anything. But he shouldn't. He also wanted to know who these people were who'd locked him in that tiny closet. The only time he'd ever stepped outside during the day was at 5 a.m. when he went to tend the garden. Then he'd slam him back into that tiny space. Even though he was 8 years old, he knew what his uncle and aunt were doing was wrong, but he couldn't do anything about it. He knew this whelp tried everything. But when the police came to ask the truth, the Dursleys denied everything, saying their nephew was just a dirty little liar. He tried every trick in the book to make his family like him, but they seemed destined to hate him. It was 4:30 a.m. when the Dursleys' guests were about to arrive. Harry knew this whelp could hear his uncle and aunt in the living room telling Dudley, his cousin's big whale, that they should be there soon. Yet they arrived an hour late. When they finally showed up, Vernon opened the door with the most charming smile he could muster, though it looked more like a balloon fish about to burst. The first person he saw was a woman with gorgeous red hair and an aura of confidence that shouldn't be underestimated. The man behind her maintained the same air of confidence, though his eyes glinted with a threatening gleam while his demeanor remained unshaken. "Hello, you must be Vernon Dursley, right?" the woman asked. "Yeah, and you must be Mrs. Potts and Mr. Stark?" Vernon asked. With a nod to confirm their identity, Vernon invited them into his home. His wife Petunia led them to the living room where their son Dudley was seated. They discussed the profits they'd reap by joining their company, assuring him they wouldn't regret it. Unbeknownst to them, Harry had been eavesdropping on their conversation and was surprised to hear only one voice when they mentioned there would be 2 guests. However, he only heard the voices of a woman and Uncle Vernon. Later, when they went to eat, he barely caught a word, so he couldn't learn more about the mysterious guests. Eventually, they returned to the living room to resume their conversation. Finally, he managed to hear the second guest's voice, but it wasn't what he expected. "Peps, is it possible to leave or stay? It's becoming a waste of time." Finally, Stark spoke up. With the intention of keeping them around longer, Petunia initiates a conversation with Stark. "Have you ever been to England, Mr. Stark?" asked Petunia with the utmost kindness she could muster. "Yeah, I've been there before," Tony replied. "How did you like the places?" "Pretty flat, if you ask me," he said coldly. "Smaller than New York, it rains all the time, and people are pretty boring." "Want me to keep going? But you must have found something interesting, right?" Petunia asked timidly, clearly intimidated by the Stark. "There was that woman, but she was married. It was just a one-night stand," Tony replied with a wistful tone. "Oh, I'm sorry. What's her name? If you don't mind me telling you, would that be okay?" "Lily. She was named Lily." "What an intriguing woman Lily was." "Why are you suddenly white now, Mrs. Dursley?" Tony asked. Lily was my sister's name. She passed away sadly. Her husband too." Petunia replied. "Your sister, was her name Lily Evans by chance?" Tony asked. "Yeah." Petunia replied, now terrified of the man who knew her sister. "You look just like him," she whispered. "Excuse me? What did you say?" You resemble me." "Petunia." "Coopa Vernon." All of a sudden, Dudley came back from his room crying, saying that a certain Harry was making noise. "Who's this Harry Dursley?" Pepper asked politely. "It's our nephew." Vernon spat violently, as if the word made him sick. "Why haven't you shown it to us yet?" "Because this guy's a monster." "Harry, is that Lily's son?" Tony asked. Can we see him?" Tony asked. "No, the monster is right where it is," Vernon replied. "Dursley, you must have misunderstood me completely. I want to see that child." Tony snapped, each word drawn out deliberately. Under pressure, Vernon led them to the small closet beneath their staircase. When he opened it, they were startled to find a 6-year-old boy inside. The child looked utterly terrified at the thought of his uncle doing something to him. Tony examined Lily's green eyes more closely, then saw something even more terrifying than Pepper's anger toward him. The child mirrored him like 2 peas in a pod, except for those extraordinary green eyes. The child himself shared the same traits. His eyes were wide open and his mouth hung limply in a comical manner, though his gaze betrayed fear. "Little one, what do you think about leaving here?" Tony asked gently. "You're not obligated to say yes if you want to stay with your uncle, and I'll leave you alone." "Never," he thought to himself. "Okay, I'll do that," Harry replied, his voice trembling with hesitation. Content took Harry into his arms and left without saying goodbye to the Dursleys, knowing Pepper was following them after telling the Dursleys they would return. Tony settled into the back seat of his luxury car with utmost kindness, waiting for Pepper to enter before heading to their hotel. When they finally arrived at the hotel, Tony requested an extra bed in his suite for a 3rd person. When it was ready, they led Harry to their suite and laid him down on a cozy, large bed. "Tony, what are we supposed to do?" Pepper asked. "What do you mean, Peps? You can see he's just like me and he's mine," Tony retorted. "Yeah, I know, and I wouldn't stop you from keeping him. He's your son and it's obvious. But we were supposed to be back in 2 days. Well, tomorrow we'll go to the Dursleys' place to collect his belongings, then head back to New York to finalize the paperwork so they can be legally recognized as mine." Pepper gave the green light, and Tony started calling people to prepare his son's rooms in their Malibu home and the Stark Tower. The next day, Tony received a call informing him that the rooms were finished and ready to move in. Tony let Harry sleep a bit longer before going to the Dursleys to fetch his son's belongings. When he returned empty-handed, learning that the boy didn't actually own any of his real stuff, Tony decided to buy some clothes with Harry instead. New York. When Harry returned to the hotel, he was still asleep, and Tony grew increasingly anxious. But Pepper reminded him it was still 10 a.m. When Harry woke up, he felt strangely refreshed. He jumped up, remembering he hadn't eaten breakfast and had slept in all night. Then he remembered a man had come to fetch him at the Dursleys' house, and that man knew his mother. Rising, he went to what he thought was the kitchen and saw the lady with the man. She noticed him coming and gave him a gentle smile. "Harry, did you sleep well?" she asked him. "Yeah. Thanks a bunch, madam," Harry asked. "Oh, my name's Virginia Pepper Potts, but you can call me Pepper if you want." "All right, Mrs. Pepper," Harry replied, his voice trembling with nervousness. "Tony's in the living room if you want to see him." He quickly said a quick thank you and headed to the living room. The man was watching a movie on the giant TV screen. When he entered the room, Tony smiled at him and gestured for him to sit down with him. "So, slept well?" he asked once Harry was seated. "Yeah. Thanks for letting me out of the Dursleys' house. But I don't want to keep bothering you. What's the deal, dude?" "You're coming with us to America," Tony said. With no room to protest, Harry had no choice but to go along with them. They left around 1 p.m. in Tony's private jet. Harry was surprised to see Tony had his own jet and thought he must be super rich to own one. During the ride, they watched movies, especially when Harry confessed he'd never listened to any films before. They enjoyed Austin Power. Then Tony kept calling Harry Mini-moi that Harry found this both hilarious and refreshing, especially since Tony treated him well and had a great time with him. They talked about what Harry wanted to do later, and to Tony and Pepper's surprise, Harry revealed his keen interest in mechanical engineering. He explained that he'd been quite adept at this field since childhood. He also shared that one of his dreams was to create something entirely his own. "I'll help you make this dream come true," Tony said. "I swear by it." "What other dreams do you have?" Pepper asked. "Well, I've always wanted a family that truly loves me. But I never would have believed my father would still be alive," Harry said. "We'll be arriving in New York in a few minutes. I'll show you. I'll introduce Happy and Jarvis. I'm sure you'll adore them," Tony said, moved by what his son had said. "Okay," replied Harry. They finally made it to New York and were greeted by the driver. Tony's staff member Happy looked surprised to see a miniature version of his boss, but still smiled at Harry, who reciprocated. They were led to a massive tower with Stark glowing at the top. Upon arrival, they got attacked by paparazzi who tried their best to snap good shots but failed repeatedly. Harry was intimidated by all the flashing lights, but Tony reassured him that the tinted windows prevented them from seeing clearly. After entering the tower and returning to the loft, they were welcomed by Jarvis, the AI and former butler of Tony. "Welcome home, Harry." Harry was awestruck by the tower's interior beauty and couldn't believe he'd be living here. Tony gave him time to explore his surroundings before taking him on a tour. When they finally returned to Earth, Tony first showed him the adjacent kitchen and living room, then led him to his laboratory. Harry found it wonderful. He eventually settled into his room. Currently, it was beige with a basic double bed featuring a dresser, desk, mirror, computer, TV, and a private bathroom. The room offered a full view of. In New York, he could see Central Park. It's not much, but I hope you like it. Tomorrow we'll go collect toys, books, and clothes to make it more personal. Today, you pick the color for your walls, choose bed linens and curtains, then decide on your bathroom colors, says Tony. It's wonderful. Really?
I'm absolutely thrilled.
Thanks, Tony, Harry replied. Afterward, they returned to Pepper, who was already preparing dinner. While they ate, Tony kept feeling like he'd forgotten something, but couldn't pinpoint what it was. After finishing their meal, Pepper took charge of obtaining the official paperwork needed to secure legal custody of Harry, while Tony and Harry headed to the first lab. There, Harry realized one of his greatest dreams came true. He built a helicopter from scratch. What Pepper never knew and will never know is that the helicopter can transform into a flamethrower robot when Harry's in danger. They discussed Harry's room color scheme and other details. He decided to use black and emerald green for the walls, complete with red curtains and gold and silver bed linens. While they were discussing these choices, Pepper received official documents that could also change Harry's name. "So, would you like to change or keep your name, Harry?" Tony asked. "I want to keep him, but we can change my second name if you'd like," said Harry. "You're sure this doesn't bother you? Don't you want to keep a little memento of James Potter?" Pepper asked. "No, it doesn't bother me," Harry replied. "Perfect. So from now on, you'll be called Harry Howard Stark," Tony replied cheerfully. As Tony was finishing his sentence, the door opened to reveal a man in his 40s. He had slightly curly hair, blue-gray eyes, and wore glasses. The man looked utterly bewildered by what was unfolding before him. Finally, Tony seemed to snap out of it. "Oh, Bruce. I knew I was forgetting something." "Tony, who's the kid who looks like you but is younger?" Bruce asked. "Bruce, let me introduce you to Jeremy's son. Harry, I'm introducing you to Bruce Banner, the mighty and evil Hulk, and my best friend." "Hello. I'm delighted to meet you, Mr. Banner," Harry said shyly. "Harry, I'm thrilled to meet you too, but don't take your father's word for it. Most of what he says is just nonsense. And you," he points at Tony. "How did you manage to have a son as charming as him? Seriously, how did you pull this off on Earth? Creating a miniature version of yourself?" Blagwa Bruce. "Bruce, you're hurting me. I was about to name you godfather to my gorgeous son, but I can't remember now. Maybe I should ask Cap. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. He's always wanted to take care of a kid," Tony said with a sly grin. "You'd never name Steve as your child's godfather, but who will you name godmother?" "Natasha?" Bruce asked. "In fact, I'm not sure if I should wait before introducing Harry to the other Avengers. You see, I want to make sure he's safe," Tony replied. With Tony in the mix, Bruce agreed to become Harry's official godfather and met his godchild, discovering he was truly a wonderful kid. Harry, for his part, adored his new godfather. When Bruce asked if it bothered him about living with him, Harry replied that he was thrilled to be living with him and didn't mind the arrangement one bit. The next day, Tony, Harry, and Bruce went shopping for new clothes for Harry. When Harry stepped into the store, he was taken aback by the overwhelming price tag. Everything looked ridiculously expensive, but Tony reassured him that he could have had anything he wanted. So he picked up a few pairs of pants, black jeans and skinny jeans, several t-shirts in different colors. His favorites were the black one with a bold Iron Man logo and a green one. He also bought a full black suit with a green tie, simply because green was his favorite color. They went to a toy store too, But Harry wasn't really into toys, though Tony ended up buying him tons of them anyway. When they returned to the tower, Harry's room had been fully prepared by Tony's team. Pepper asked if they'd been cautious outside, as they wanted to keep Harry under wraps for a while longer. Tony reassured her by saying he'd disguised himself during their outing and thanked her for her concern with a sarcastic smile. Yet what awaited them in the coming weeks would prove far more shocking than anything else. When Tony stood up, he was startled to see the rest of the Avengers and the director sitting casually in his living room, sipping coffee, probably without his permission. What really shocked him was Thor's presence. Though Thor was supposed to be in Asgard monitoring his brother in prison, Tony couldn't quite figure out what they'd done to him. He figured Thor must be locked up in a cell after all. "Fury, what gives you the nerve to honor my humble abode?" Tony retorted sarcastically. "It happened that some individuals, whom I won't name, spotted a child who bore an uncanny resemblance to the elder Tony Stark with the so-called Tony Stark." Fury responded, Then, can I find out when these people first noticed this strange combination?" "Yesterday at a Starbucks not that far from here." "Tony, who are these people?" The Avengers had left Tony behind before spotting the exact replica of Playboy Richiest. The boy had stunning green eyes and looked about 7 years old. He'd grown slightly during his stay at Tony's place, sporting a black Sabbath hoodie with Iron Man pants. For a moment, everyone froze in silence. Fury seized the opportunity to slip away from the tower, a faint smile lingering at the corner of his lips. "Thor, when did you come back?" Tony finally snapped, breaking the silence. "I just got back, Iron Man. It's a pleasure to see you again, Stark. But who's this kid we're seeing here?" Thor demanded. "This is, well, let me introduce myself. I can't." Bredawea Tony rolls his eyes. "Hello, I'm Harry Stark. It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Harry said with a charming smile. "Tony, how could such a sweet and charming child end up being held captive?" asked Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow. "I just don't get what's going on anymore. How could a woman have put up with you for so long to have your child?" Steve demanded. "Hey, you guys are being mean. I'm sure my mom was such an amazing person that even Dad loved her and became a wonderful dad." "Stop being mean to him," Harry exclaimed. With tears streaming down his face, Harry bolted into his bedroom in a panic. Pepper and Bruce seized the moment to slip into the living room. When Tony explained what had just happened, Bruce struggled to contain his rage, especially since the Hulk had been deeply attached to Harry during their weeks together. The Avengers were stunned. The rest suddenly felt extremely uncomfortable having shared everything with Harry, especially when Tony explained that Harry had come from a toxic environment and wanted to avenge his uncle and aunt for what they'd done to him. He also revealed that he and Bruce had shared their story with him, which made him admire them all. Unable to sit still any longer, they went to apologize to the young boy. "Harry, can we go back inside?" Steve asked gently. "Yeah," he mumbled, though they still heard him. "Hey, we came to apologize. We were just teasing your dad, especially since he's with us 247. Sorry, we didn't mean to hurt you. If we hadn't shown up, I think the doc would have killed us for messing with you." The captain's humor ended there, and Harry responded with a smile that was absolutely wonderful. The Avengers shared their adventures with him, and Harry listened with eyes sparkling with wonder. During those brief moments when each member of the Avengers told him stories as thrilling and hilarious as they were entertaining, they discovered the little extra details that had escaped their imagination. They found Harry to be an exceptionally bright child for his age, but what could we expect from the son of Tony Stark, a genius who built his first robot at 6? They sighed with the young family, and when bedtime came, Harry fell asleep with a radiant smile. All he wished for was that his life would remain as wonderful as ever. Little did he know how right he was, yet how wrong he was at the same time. Harry had been living with his father for 3 years, and he never imagined he'd be this happy. Let me tell you, before turning 9, Harry lived with those horrible aunt and uncle who abused him. But one day, when his father came to their place for business, he spotted Harry and dragged him out faster than you can say minute. Shortly after moving in, Tony pulled off the Dudleys' imprisonment. Since then, Harry had been living with his new family, his father, stepmother, and uncles. He quickly became famous when the world learned Tony Stark had a son. People were eager to know more about him, and they were thrilled to discover he had an excellent manner, was charming, as intelligent as his father, and surprisingly cute for his young age. As a result, he soon became the darling of America and was adored by everyone. Over the past 3 years, Loki had successfully earned forgiveness for his crimes and was serving his sentence by working to rebuild the Bifrost, which was now nearly complete. He also gained acceptance into Harry's ever-growing family. Today was a special day. It was Harry's birthday. Like all kids his age, Harry couldn't wait for his parents to wake up so they could have fun. Tony had been tasked with delivering a surprise on each of his birthdays, one he wouldn't learn about until the day itself. Last year, they had attended the Hobbit premiere and even met the movie's cast members. He was genuinely wondering how Tony would handle this, yet couldn't help but smile at the thought of what he'd do. Finally, he decides to get up and wait for his parents in the kitchen, but instead is greeted by a giant banner reading "Happy Birthday to the most beautiful, wonderful, intelligent, charming, and so much more, son." Harry couldn't help but laugh, and his family burst into laughter at the same time, shouting "Happy Birthday." He threw himself into his father's arms and burst into tears of joy.
"Merci, papa,"
said Harry. "Why are you thanking me right away? I haven't told you what we're going to do today yet," Tony replied. "So what are we going to do?" Harry asked. "Wait a minute, you'll see when we get there. For now, get dressed and we're leaving in an hour by jet," Tony replied. He made a lightning-fast dash to reunite with his family waiting for him. Then they headed to the Stark family's private jet. During the flight, Bruce presented his gift of French-language copy of the Knights of Emerald, though he didn't mind since he already spoke it like a native speaker. Thor and Jane gifted him a pair of green and black sneakers, the color's favorite. Steve gave her a CD from his favorite band, Linkin Park. Finally, Clint and Natasha offered him tickets to their concert. Harry thanked them for the gifts and took the chance to ask Tony where they were headed. Unable to anticipate the question any longer, Tony answered, "We're going to England." Harry reacted immediately. At first, he just stood there with his mouth gaping in a rather comical manner. Then he started getting angry at his father for not understanding why they were going to England. However, Tony explained that his gift was there, though he didn't reveal what it was. Frustrated and sad about not knowing why he was in England or what his gift actually was, Harry returned to his seat and fell asleep in his chair. Tony gently shook him awake and announced their arrival. Still disoriented, Harry stepped outside to find themselves at the edge of a lake and a colossal forest, though what truly stunned him was the manor house standing there, which stood before her. It was Victorian yet modern in style, spanning 4 floors with an interior that was simply colossal. "Harry, here's your gift. The brand new Stark Manor. It's yours to do as you please. You can make whatever you want there," Tony said. "Dad, it's absolutely gorgeous. So much," Harry replied. "What the hell are you talking about? How many times do I have to tell you? You're my son, that's common sense. Now, get back in line and thank me," Tony retorted sarcastically. "Thanks. I love you, Dad. I love you too, Harry." They embraced so warmly that a tear welled up in the eyes of the rest of the family, who gazed at each other for a long while. After their heartfelt embrace, Tony led them on a tour of the manor, showing them every corner and hidden treasure. To both amuse and impress them, he handed out a map of the manor and the forest, reminding them to meet again there. The manor's vast scale and the forest's resemblance to Central Park made it an ideal meeting spot. Their rooms were on the 2nd floor, with 1 for each of them and 3 guest rooms for friends in case Harry decided to bring guests. They arrived by jet, but the descent road was long, so they had a sports car, one of Tony's favorites, a van, a motorcycle, and a motocross bike. After settling in, they decided to explore the town the next day. The manor also had a high-quality laboratory right for Harry. As he was unpacking his suitcase, something strange happened. An owl or a cat owl came knocking on his window, carrying a letter. Curious, Harry opened the window and the owl flew into his room, dropping the letter on his bed. He picked it up and was startled to find it addressed to him, but under the name Harry James Potter. At the same time, an elderly woman was banging on the main gates of the manor. Tony didn't know how anyone could have entered the estate without warning, so he went to answer. The woman wore a long emerald green dress, sporting small glasses and a perfectly styled bun that held her gray hair in place. "Hello? What are you doing on my property?" Tony asked, sounding a bit skeptical.
Hello, I'm Minerva McGonagall.
"Is there a Harry Potter here?" asked the woman named Minerva. "Follow me," said Tony. Tony went to find Harry, who was still holding his letter in his hands, looking at it curiously. He led him to the living room where someone was waiting to see Harry Potter. As they descended, they saw their family watching the stranger. When she spotted Harry, she frowned slightly, as if expecting something different. "Harry Potter?" demands she. "Actually, it's Harry Stark. Who are you, if you'll allow me to ask? Are you the one who sent me this letter?" Harry's request when presenting the letter he was holding. "Stark? Aren't you supposed to be with your uncle and aunt?" Minerva asked. "Yes, if my father had never come to save me from them and you hadn't answered my questions, madam." Harry replied, "Okay. My name is Minerva McGonagall, and yes, it was me who sent you this letter. If you'd mind opening it and reading it, I'd be truly grateful," replied Minerva. He opened it and read aloud what was written. "College of Powdlard, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Director, Albus Dumbledore. Commander of the Great Order of Merlin. Doctor of Sorcery, Chief Enchanter. Supreme Manitou of the International Federation of Mages and Sorcerers. Cher Mr. Potter, we are delighted to inform you that you have been officially enrolled at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The attached list contains essential books and equipment required for your academic journey. With the school year starting on September 1st, we'll be waiting for your owl by July 31st at the latest. Please accept, dear Mr. Potter, our sincere and distinguished sentiments. Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Director. Is this a joke? So it's bad?" Harry asked. "No, Mr. Potter, this is no joke. You are a wizard, and you've been one since the day you were born," Minerva replied. "I'm not a Potter, but Stark. If what you're saying is true, then show us that so-called magic." Harry asked. "Fash." Noticing the whole group staring at her and waiting for an explanation except Thor, who seemed more open to magic since his own brother practiced it bit, he was still waiting to witness Midgardian magic. Minerva grabs him and casts a simple levitation spell, which greatly surprised Bruce, Tony, and Harry, those with more scientific minds than magical ones. "Amazing! This Midgard magic is way more basic than Asgard's, but I'm stumped that some of you actually know it. My brother would be stoked to learn this," the blonde giant exclaimed. "Iti, who are you? I didn't expect to perform magic in front of so many muggles. So please don't tell anyone."
Demanda Minerva. "I'm for Odinson,
the god of thunder and Harry's uncle, Pepper Potts, Harry's mother, finally becoming a stepmother. Bruce Banner, Harry's godfather and Tony's best friend. Clint Barton on uncle. Natasha Romanoff, godmother and aunt. Stephen Rogers, Harry's uncle. Tony Stark, I'm his father." Minerva observed the peculiar group and noticed that Harry seemed genuinely pleased with their association with him. She also spotted the striking resemblance between Tony and Harry, which made her wonder aloud. Could this boy standing before me not be James Potter's son? So James Potter isn't your father? Then who's your real mother, if you don't mind me asking? It was Lily Evans, Harry said. But you should know that, right? Yes, of course you have those eyes. I considered her and James as my two top students. What happened to Mr. and Mrs. Dudleys? Asked Minerva. In prison. The whole family responded in unison. Their son? We don't know. They responded in unison. All right then. The reason I came here was to confirm your Hogwarts enrollment. Are you coming or not? Harry looked at Tony for his opinion, but Tony replied that it was his choice. Harry responded that he would go to Hogwarts. Tony couldn't help worrying about him. As Minerva had explained, they'd stay at Hogwarts all year and only return for Christmas break and summer vacation. She also told them he needed to be at platform 9 3/4 with all his school supplies on September 1st, as the train would take him directly to Hogwarts. She gave them the address of the place where they should buy her belongings. As she left, she reminded them that all the items he needed were in the letter and handed Harry a key to the money. He had it in their bank. They talked for ages about when to retrieve his belongings and decided to go next week. Tony and Pepper would accompany Harry since they were his parents. Thor left for Asgard, saying he had something important to do and would return with a surprise. The next day, as promised, they went to the city and explored various spots. Harry had an incredible day because he'd made a friend his age, and no one recognized his father except his new friend. He'd met him while they were enjoying ice cream. She immediately recognized him. Famous Tony Stark, and started bombarding him with all sorts of questions. Harry laughed heartily at his father's face. She quickly grew fond of Harry for listening and told him she didn't live too far from here if he wanted to visit for fun or just chat. She introduced herself as Hermione Granger and shared her real name. The week flew by as Harry spent countless hours with Hermione. When he went to the Leaning Tree with his parents, they were all amazed by the magical energy surrounding him. They bought everything Harry needed and visited Gringotts, the wizarding bank. To their surprise, Harry's adoptive father had his own fortune, bequeathing everything he owned to him, making Harry his magical heir. Thor finally returned, and Harry was thrilled to discover the surprise was Loki. Loki had become his closest friend, and he knew he'd be doomed if he couldn't admit he'd do anything to keep Harry safe. "Uncle Loki," Harry exclaimed as he spotted Loki. "Hey there, little one. Sorry I couldn't be there for the belated birthday celebration. What would you say if I just give you this gift right away? Are your parents okay with this?" Loki demanded. "I also learned you're a wizard. Show your uncle your magic. What's my gift? I'm sure it won't bother Mom and Dad." Harry asked impatiently. "Well, I found out you had to leave for school without family contact. And I also learned you could bring along either a cat, owl, or toad." "Uncle Loki, you're just spinning around the bush. Tell me what my gift is at the end." "I thought I could transform into a cat and come to your school with you," he finally said. "That way you wouldn't be completely alone." "That would be awesome. Dad, can he do it? Please?" Harry asked, his eyes shining with anticipation. "Why not? As long as you don't forget to write to your mother and me, otherwise things will go south, young man," Tony said with a sardonic smile. "Yeah, Dad. Thank you, Dad," Harry exclaimed as he jumped into his father's arms. Harry told Loki everything that had happened during his absence and mentioned his new friend Hermione, who lived in the town where they were. Finally, September 1st arrived too soon for Tony and Pepper, who now had to say goodbye to their son. But they felt a bit more at ease knowing Loki, who had been transformed into a black cat with sparkling green eyes, was with them. Harry was thrilled to learn magic like his uncle, but he also feared rejection from other students. He found a compartment with Loki and told his parents he was fine and not to worry too much. The journey began smoothly and he played with Loki. But a loud knock on the door snapped him out of his daydreams, revealing it was just another boy his age, who wanted to sit down with him. The boy had hair as red as his mother's and his godmother's. "Hey there, I'm Ron Weasley, and Croutard is the rat. He's been in my family for almost 10 years. The red-haired guy introduced himself. "I'm Harry Stark and this sweet little cat is Loki," Harry said with a laugh, noticing Loki's puffed-up face at being called "gentle little kitten." They talked for quite some time, and Harry discovered that Ron came from a family entirely composed of wizards and witches, with 5 older brothers and a younger sister. Their conversation was interrupted by a boy with blonde hair and gray eyes who carried an air of superiority. Ron didn't seem to, though he didn't appreciate it. Harry invited the blonde to sit with them, as the boy seemed to be looking for a place to hide. He learned that the blonde was named Draco Malfoy, and that the Malfoys were as purebloods as Ron, yet felt superior to everyone else 1,000 times over. When Ron said this, Draco frowned and replied that he didn't want to end up like his father. Harry laughed when Ron said this, as it reminded him of his own father, except his own was clearly better and more handsome, that he told his 2 new friends, and they both burst into laughter with him. The biggest surprise came when Hermione returned and realized she was also a witch. Seeing that familiar face, she seemed relieved and decided to stay with them. However, she went to change into her witch robes and advised them to do the same. As the journey neared its end, Draco noticed Harry's scar and exclaimed, "He's Harry Potter. Why did you lie to us? You told us you were Harry Stark, not Potter." Draco exclaimed in surprise. "What? You've got that scar? The one on your forehead shaped like a lightning bolt?" Ron asked, equally excited. No, I didn't lie to you. My name is Stark because my real dad is Tony Stark, not James Potter. But there was a time when they called me Harry Potter. I said Harry in such a dramatic way it made Loki laugh his head off and eased the tension. Still, I'm still the same person. And what's so special about this scar? You don't know? Yet everyone knows, said Ron. About 10 years ago, there was a time when the magical world was shrouded in darkness and wizards lived in constant fear. Because 10 years ago, the greatest dark mage of all time stood at the pinnacle of power, defeating every enemy with a lethal spell that killed instantly. But he was defeated by a tiny infant who only received a scar shaped like a lightning bolt on his forehead. That infant was you, Harry. You're a celebrity, and your parents, your biological parents, and your adoptive parents died protecting you from them. Harry was left speechless by what he had just learned. By the time his mind cleared, they were finally at their destination. Harry was sound asleep, dreaming of the new life he'd just started a few months ago. His father and mother-in-law, whom he called Mom, were sleeping peacefully in the next room. His godfather Bruce was probably in the basement lab, scrolling through his latest gamma-ray reaction reports. He absolutely loved his new life. At first, it was tough to make friends at his new school, being the world's newest celebrity just because his father was famous. But he managed to build genuine friendships that truly cared about him as Harry, not Tony Stark's son. Everything finally fell into place. He had family, friends, and the life he'd always dreamed of. During the summer, they resided in the Stark Tower, while for the rest of the year, they stayed in Malibu. They had decorated the house, and Harry was almost certain they could spot it on Mars because it shone so brightly. His parents had given him the right to invite his friends over for Christmas, but Harry refused, saying he wanted to spend his first Christmas with his family alone, meaning only his uncles, godmother, and parents would be with him. He decided to get out of bed and wake his parents. He made a silent path toward their bedroom, then burst open the door and jumped onto their bed as he reached it. Papa, Mama, it's Christmas. Get up, Harry shouted with a beaming smile. Wishing you a Merry Christmas too, Harry, said Tony as he stroked his excited son's head. Merry Christmas, Dad and Mom, Harry replied, hugging his parents. His parents got up and followed Harry to the Christmas tree, where he spotted a pile of presents. Harry looked at the gifts with wide eyes and noticed there were some for him too. I'll never get used to seeing gifts that belong to me, Harry thought with a smile. His parents told him they needed to wait for the others to arrive, and Harry accepted. The wait didn't bother him. Having gifts was already extraordinary in his eyes. Tony and Pepper asked Harry to dress for their guests, which he did. He returned wearing a black shirt with a red bow tie, tight black trousers, and his hair, left flowing freely, styled into a ponytail. His parents were dressed similarly to him. Tony wore a black shirt like Harry's, but his tie featured red and green stripes, while his trousers were dark red, not too dark. Pepper, for her part, wore a stunning red dress matching Tony's trousers in color. His Uncle Bruce got up an hour after them, wishing Harry, Tony, and Pepper a Merry Christmas. Clint and Natasha arrived at the same time. For some time now, they had been officially dating. Though Harry hadn't known them for long, he was thrilled for them. Thor arrived later with Jane, the young scientist living with the demigod. Being an energy ball himself, Thor adored every moment he spent with Jane. The family member who terrified Tony was director Nick Fury and his assistant, whom Tony called Maria Hill. Neither bothered Harry, who saw Nick as a sort of grandfather figure. As for Maria, she followed the director wherever he went, shielding them from any potential dangers. Unfortunately, his Uncle Steve couldn't make it, so he couldn't join them for Christmas celebrations. But that didn't stop him from to send a gift for Harry, who had signed up for a martial arts class of his choice. They set the table and the women brought their lunch preparations. When everything was ready, they gathered around the table and enjoyed the magnificent meal laid out before them. Harry couldn't have asked for anything better, dining at a table filled with people who loved him and whom he cherished in return. After finishing their tasks, they gathered around the Christmas tree, and Tony started calling out names for gift-giving. Thor, he calls Tony, clutching a gift shaped like a small box. Thor stepped forward and took the gift from his friend's hands with utmost care. He tore open the wrapping paper and chuckled at the surprise. He just received a box of strawberry-flavored Pop-Tarts. His favorite treat. Tony called out to Bruce, who gratefully accepted the present. When he opened it, he found a set of science kits, those safe, kid-friendly experiment kits parents give their children to try out. Clint and Natasha received money from Tony for the apartment they wanted to live in. Nick got a card from Harry, and the director thanked Harry for his thoughtful gesture. Finally, it was time for Tony to present his gift to Pepper. Peps, here's my gift. It's not much, but I hope you'll accept it, Tony said nervously. Tony handed her a tiny little box, so small that Pepper took it without understanding why he felt nervous about giving her the gift. When she opened it, what she saw left her speechless. It was a simple yet exquisite ring, with a small diamond on top and her birthstone a sapphire. So, what do you think? Virginia Potts, will you marry me? Tony asked with a nervous little smile. Ooh, yeah. Tony, I'm all in, Pepper exclaimed, throwing herself into her fiancé's open arms and bursting into tears of joy. I love you, Peps, Tony said, passionately kissing her. Harry watched the scene and couldn't help but smile at his parents' happiness. Seeing them happy made him happy too. The rest of his family seemed to share the same sentiment. They all smiled, some even shedding tears of joy. Finally, Natasha, Jane, and to everyone's surprise, Bruce, were moved to tears. The newlyweds paused their intimate moment to continue exchanging gifts. Harry received a PlayStation Vita and several games for his new console. But his favorite gift that truly touched his heart was the last one. He received a family photo album filled with pages he could gradually populate as time passed. At the front of the album stood a photo of himself alone. The album was black with emerald green text, his favorite color. It featured photos of his parents, Mother Lily, Uncle Bruce, Steve, Clint and Natasha, Thor, Nick, and finally one showing the entire family. Lourished with a smile. Harry had to admit it. He came from the best family in the world and had just experienced the first and most wonderful Christmas of his life. There was nothing he could ask for better. They disembarked from the train, and in their first years, they were summoned by a bearded giant named Hagrid. He took them in small boats and instructed them to spread out in the canoes. Harry was bonding with his new friends and discussing their favorite passages from Bathilda Turgidac's The Tale of Hogwarts with Hermione. Meanwhile, Loki was leaning against his shoulder, trembling with fear of falling into the lake, especially when Ron mentioned there was a giant octopus that devoured intruders who accidentally fell into the water. When the Muggleborns and wizards arrived at the castle, they were awestruck by its grandeur, though they hadn't yet entered. The entrance was so massive that even first-year students could fit through. As they climbed the stairs, they spotted Mrs. McGonagall standing there. Hello everyone and welcome to Hogwarts. I'm Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts. You'll be calling me either Mrs. McGonagall or Professor McGonagall. I strongly recommend using the latter. In a few minutes, you'll be assigned to the 4 Hogwarts houses: Gryffindor, Serpentard, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. Now, if you're ready, please take 2 at a time and let's head to the dining hall. Harry was paired with Hermione, while Ron was matched with Draco. Though the first boy didn't particularly enjoy being paired with the blonde, he had little choice. As they entered, they saw the magical ceiling glowing with thousands of floating candles that illuminated the entire hall. 4 towering tables stood vertically in the center, and another diagonally positioned one for the teachers. There was also a small stool where an old hat sat, and Harry wondered why they hadn't thrown it in the trash yet. To everyone's surprise, the hat began to sing a kind of poem, and when it finished, the older students applauded. Professor McGonagall stepped onto the stage and addressed them. When I call your name, you'll come up here and I'll place the choikspo on your head for the distribution. Abbott. Hannah, a little girl with blonde-brown hair, stood up, her eyes filled with fear. McGonagall placed the hat on her head, and the hat let out a cry. Poof! The table that was supposed to be the Puffs table erupted in cheers. Harry barely noticed until a name he hadn't heard in years was announced. Dudley. Call Professor McGonagall. The boy who once resembled a whale had now become lean and muscular, with blonde hair and his father's pig-like face still visible on his features. Though he appeared fearful and sad to be here, Harry could still detect those fleeting emotions in his small blue eyes despite the concealment. The hat fell over his head, and after a moment of hesitation, his companion finally exclaimed, "Puffleful!" Harry watched his cousin settle at the puff-puff table next to Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones. He waited for Hermione's name to be called, but when she finally got up there, she seemed just as nervous about stepping onto the stage. Chover also took a while choosing his house, but in the end he shouted, "Gryffindor!" The table welcomed him with open arms, and he looked genuinely proud of himself. A few minutes after Hermione, Draco was summoned and placed in Slytherin. Ron couldn't help but chuckle at his frenemies' confused face. He couldn't decide whether to support or oppose him. Finally, it was Harry's turn. "Potter, Harry, call McGonagall." The reaction was immediate. The students began searching the room and whispering to each other. Dudley also searched for his curious cousin who wanted to see him again, but he already had an idea in mind, what he looked like. As for Harry, he didn't move. He didn't want people to call him by his old name, so he just waited. McGonagall seems to understand what he was thinking.
Stark, Harry.
Beaming with victory and the others' confusion, Harry stepped onto the stage and settled into a small stool. He glanced around at the crowd staring at him, finding satisfaction in his cousin's startled expression as he realized Harry was watching him. Finally, the sorting hat settled on his head, and Harry heard a voice in his mind. "Mr. Potter, or should I say Stark? It's a pleasure to finally meet you, but I'm here just to help you find the right house. Right? Let's see. Brilliant, manipulative in the right way, loyal to those you love, and incredibly brave. This will be tough, Mr. Stark. You're meant for every house. But which one would suit you best?" "Ah, I found it. It's Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table erupted in cheers at having the survivor in their house. Harry took a seat next to Hermione, while Loki was disappointed that his nephew wasn't part of the Serpent House. But Harry genuinely seemed thrilled to be with Hermione, so he didn't complain. Ron soon joined them at the table and introduced his older brothers Fred and George, who were real troublemakers. Loki couldn't help but admire them as well, the jokes they'd made in previous years. Harry and Hermione burst into laughter, agreeing to become apprentice prank wizards under Fred and George's guidance. Ron joined them, though he initially resisted joining the older brothers, but ultimately did so to please his new friends. Harry asked Loki to find them a room where they could to meet without the professors catching them. Loki did exactly what Harry asked him to do, as he wanted to help with their schemes too. Albus Dumbledore, the school headmaster, delivered a speech about the school rules, but most students were too hungry to pay attention. He ended up uttering the world's strangest word, Bertie Crochet. As soon as he finished, a feast appeared before the amazed eyes of first-year students and the ravenous gazes of upperclassmen. They ate their fill and discussions broke out everywhere. Harry glanced at the teacher's table and noticed one of them staring at him strangely. He found it odd and turned to Percy, one of Ron's older brothers. "Percy, who's that black-haired professor with greasy hair staring at me like that for ages?" Harry quipped, playfully teasing the teacher's hair. "It's Professor Rogue," Percy explained. "Don't worry. He hates all Gryffindors and is crazy about Slytherins, especially since he's the head of the Slytherin house." "Who's our house director, then?" he asked again. "Professor McGonagall," Percy said. "And before you ask me, no, she doesn't show favoritism like Professor Rogue. Sorry, little one." The dinner ended, and the director asked the prefects of the houses to show the way through the first years to their dormitory. Percy, the Gryffindor prefect, naturally explained that the stairs often changed direction during the first years and warned students about a staircase with a hole inside. The password to enter was Caput Draconis, which they had to say to a board featuring a large lady inside. They entered and headed to the common hall. Percy told him that the left wing was for boys and the right wing for girls. Harry and Ron joined the other boys in their dormitory. Among them was a Slytherin boy who looked shy and seemed out of place, Neville Longbottom, along with Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas. They hit it off immediately and quickly became friends. Loki, meanwhile, was lying on Harry's new bed, showing no signs of disliking sharing a room. Harry settled down and vowed to write to his parents the next day. Harry woke up first and started dressing, then headed to the common room in his house. There he found a girl. She reveled in the magic around her, her laughter as innocent as a 7-year-old's, though she should have been at least 11 to attend school. With jet-black hair and eyes of stunning blue tinged with pale violet, she was utterly adorable in Harry's eyes. As he approached, sensing her approach, the little girl stopped playing with the magic. She looked at him with a terrified expression, and Harry wondered if she was afraid of him. "Excuse me, did I scare you?" Harry asked softly. "Not, just surprise." The little girl blushed and replied, "Ah, that's nice. What's your name?"
I'm Harry.
Harry asked with a smile. "Jeej, I'm called Kamari Aisha." Aisha replied. "Kamari? That's not an English name, is it?" Harry said, looking confused. "That's not my first name, but my family name. It's Japanese." "Ah? Why are you so embarrassed? If it doesn't bother you, why am I asking? It's the first time anyone has been kind to me." "Oh, how do your parents treat you?" Harry asked the little girl, looking sad. "My parents died and I live in an orphanage." The young girl replied with a heavy heart. Harry looked at her with a sad expression and decided to cheer her up by making silly jokes. At first, Aisha stared at Harry, not understanding what he was doing, but after a while, she started laughing at his antics. She eventually joined him, and the two ended up laughing until they fell to the ground. Aisha thanked Harry and left the common room. Harry watched her with satisfaction before going to wake up Loki and Ron for their meal. He found waking Ron a real challenge. But when he mentioned eating, the red-haired boy sprang up, dressed himself, and dashed to the dining room. Harry watched him dash off and couldn't help but laugh as he chased after him. Despite the castle's maze-like layout, they eventually made their way to the dining hall. They settled at Gryffindor's table, where Draco joined them, along with a little girl sharing his blonde hair and eyes that were almost white-blue. "Who's Draco?" Harry asked, gesturing at the Slytherin beside his friend. "Hasn't anyone ever told you how rude people can be?" "Seriously, I can answer myself, or you don't need to ask Dre who I am," the Slytherin retorted, clearly offended. "Haha. Folks, let me introduce you to Moriana Higgs, my honorary sister. And before you ask, yes, she's still the same old me." Draco replied with a smile. Moriana sat down beside Draco as the five began eating. Ron was devouring everything within his reach, while Loki recoiled in horror at the red-haired boy's manner and tried to suppress his discomfort. Harry openly laughed at his cat's face, and Hermione arrived just as Ron took a bite of. Harry swallowed a mouthful of crepes while still having food in his mouth. He was so laughing he couldn't breathe. Draco found his friend's antics utterly disgusting, and Moriana kept grinning foolishly at her honorary older brother's face, especially since she knew he despised people who behaved rudely at the table. After finishing their breakfast, the only ones who had managed to eat were Ron, naturally, Harry, and Moriana. The others had lost their appetite watching Ron eat. They returned to the common room and discovered McGonagall professor was distributing schedules. Harry looked at the timetable with his friends. Monday, Thursday, 7 to 8:20 lunch, 8:30 to 10:45 charms, 10:55 to 12:30 transfiguration, 12:30 to 13:20 dinner, 13:30 to 1500 hours potions, 15:10 to 1700 hours defense against the forces of evil, 17 to 1900 hours dinner, 2100 hours curfew, Tuesday, Wednesday, 7 to 8:20 lunch, 8:20 to 10:45. The story of magic, 10:55 to 12:30 defense against the forces of evil, 12:30 to 13:20 dinner, herbal medicine, 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m., 15:10 to 1700 hours transfiguration, 17 to 1900 hours dinner, 2100 hours couvre-feu. Friday, Saturday, 7 to 8:20 lunch, 8:20 to 10:45 potion, 10:55 to 12:30 transfiguration, 12:30 to 13:20 dinner, 13:30 to 1500 hours potions, 15:10 to 1700 hours charms, 17 to 1900 hours dinner, 2100 hours couvre-feu. Since it was Sunday, they had free time to do whatever they wanted. However, Professor McGonagall strongly advised them to visit the school to get a sense of their classroom layout and avoid being late for their first class the next day. They had Transfiguration and Potion with the Serpents, Charm and Defense against the forces of evil with the Huffless, and History of Magic and Herbs with the Surdigals. Starting next week, they would have weekly flying lessons every Sunday to learn how to wield a broom and Quidditch training sessions. Harry decided to explore the castle with Ron and Hermione, while also going to fetch Draco and Mariana. Just as Isla was about to leave, Harry noticed Aisha alone in a corner. He decided to ask if she wanted to join them. "Aisha, would you like to join us in exploring the school?" Harry asked with a smile. "Ah, Anakin, I'd love to, if it doesn't bother your friends, of course." Aisha replied hesitantly. "Anakin?" Harry asked. "What does that mean? It doesn't bother Hermione and Ron, right?" "Anakin means big brother in Japanese, and to me you're my new big brother," Aisha replied with a beaming smile. "So from now on, I'd like you to call me Aiken, since I'm your little sister now." "Ah, okay, Aiken, then come on over?" Harry asked again with a smile. Aisha smiled and nodded as she followed Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Hermione seemed to get along wonderfully with Aisha, who began calling her Wunchin, which she thought meant big sister. The four of them headed down to the basement to reach the common hall of the Serpents. What they didn't realize was that, just like entering the Gryffindor hall required a password, they couldn't contact Draco and Mariana, so they waited for a Slytherin to show up so he could grant them access. About 10 minutes later, a boy came out and the Gryffindors asked if they could see Draco and Marian. The boy gave them a strange look and told them to wait a bit longer. They stayed there for another solid 5 minutes until the boy left with Draco and Marian right behind him. The Gryffindors convinced them to join, and Mariana agreed only if the boy they'd asked to wait with joined them. They accepted because the crazier you get, the funnier it gets, right? Thankfully, for Gryffindor House, Theodore, Draco, and Mariana were among the few purebloods who accepted Muggleborns. Mariana and Aisha hit it off like a team, though the group discovered the two girls had a sly streak that made them uneasy. The seven wandered around the school grounds and stumbled upon a secret passage leading outside the school premises. They had a blast and decided they wouldn't let their homes ruin their friendship despite the 3 Slytherins being friends with a Muggleborn and the 3 Gryffindors being friends with Slytherins. They also discovered that most of them were pranksters, though Harry, Ron, Theodore, Aisha, Mariana, and Draco were the exception. Hermione, on the other hand, had never pulled a prank on anyone. Mariana told them the stories of the greatest pranksters Hogwarts had ever known, the Marauders. She explained that her mother often shared tales about these mischief-makers, who were so skilled that no one had ever caught them in the act. The group was said to consist of 4 members: Corndrew, Patmel, Leonard, and Quidver. As they listened to Mariana's account, Harry suddenly stood up near the end and declared they would become the next generation of Marauders, destined to outdo their predecessors. They all rose and accepted Harry's proposal. Even Hermione didn't seem as enthusiastic as the others still agreed to join them. They decided Hermione and Draco would be the brains behind the operations, Ron and Theodore would come up with prank ideas, while Harry, Aisha, and Mariana would pull off the pranks they'd brainstormed. With that, they hurried back to the castle before anyone noticed their disappearance. They let go, and as Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Aisha were leaving for their common room, Harry spotted his cousin and told the others to leave without him. Dudley, seeing this, approached his cousin, and the two retreated to a quieter, more secluded spot. They exchanged a long, meaningful gaze. Harry noticed his cousin had lost a significant amount of weight, yet still bore striking resemblance to his father. "Well, how's it going, Dudley?" Harry finally broke the silence. "I'll go." "Well, and happy to see you again," Dudley replied.
Pourquoi?
"Why the heck?" asked Dudley, completely unfazed. "Why are you happy to see me again?" "My father put your parents in prison," Harry replied, his voice serious yet confused. "Because I wanted to apologize, both for myself and my parents. Harry, what I did to you when we were young was terrible, terribly wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way. You didn't deserve it, and we got exactly what we deserved," Dudley replied sadly. "Will you ever forgive us, Harry?" "No, I will never forgive your parents, Dudley. You might be forgiven, but their parents will never be." "Why? Why can't you just forgive my parents? Okay? Why? They're in prison because of you. Your fault. I hate you. Dudley shouted, venting his rage at Harry. Dudley lunged at Harry with his fist, catching the boy off guard by his cousin's sudden personality shift. The young man didn't have time to react before being struck by his cousin's massive, powerful hand. Seizing the moment of surprise, the older brother pressed his attack relentlessly. After finishing his task, Dudley bolted off, while Harry lay motionless on the floor. He thought he might have fractured ribs and was struggling to catch his breath. Fortunately, Severus was returning from a meeting with the headmaster. As he descended to his dormitory, he heard a series of punches. Deciding to investigate, he approached and saw a first-year student staggering out. Blood splattered all over him. He caught him and quickly took him to the director's office before rushing off too. He returned to the scene to see who had been tricked by Poofsouffle. To his surprise, the person who had been tricked was none other than the infamous survivor. But he quickly regained his composure and immediately took Harry straight to the infirmary. He called Mrs. Pomfrey, who came out of her office to see Severus with a student bleeding all over. She got to work and discovered the student was Harry Potter or Stark, whichever he wanted to call himself now. She was heartbroken to see his condition on his first day at Hogwarts. Time was of the essence, as Harry's ribs were completely shattered with one fragment piercing through a lung. After hours of intense work, she managed to stabilize him and successfully realigned all his bones in their proper positions. She called Severus and told him to inform the headmaster that Harry was out of danger, but would need a week to fully recover. The headmaster then informed the other teachers that Harry wouldn't be attending the first classes due to his condition. Dumbledore had no idea what to do with Dudley. The boy kept saying he wasn't himself when he did this to Harry, so the old headmaster could only do two things: deduct over 1,000 points from his 4 houses competition tally, impose year-long suspension, and have him followed by a professor or supervisor everywhere for the rest of the year. Even though the headmaster wanted to fire Dudley, he couldn't. Dudley had nowhere else to go. The shelter he was staying at didn't want to keep him and had specifically stated they couldn't accommodate him for the entire year. The next day, Harry's friends learned he was in the infirmary with serious injuries that would keep him immobilized for several days. The principal had informed Harry's parents about his critical condition, and Tony immediately wanted to rush to school too. He could finally see his son. At the moment, Tony and Pepper were by Harry's bedside waiting for him to wake up, but he refused to open his eyes, which naturally worried his parents. Dumbledore had told them that it was young Dudley Dursley who inflicted these injuries on their sons. Tony insisted the headmaster expel Dudley from school, or he would take his son away from the magical world. At Hogwarts, Dumbledore managed to convince Harry to drop out of his first year. He then offered to take Harry back if they still didn't want him staying. The students agreed, but with one condition Dumbledore had to accept. Harry woke up in a completely unfamiliar place, and to make matters worse, he couldn't remember any of the events that had occurred earlier. A few hours ago, he tried to sit down but felt pain in his ribs and noticed bandages all over his body. Realizing he must be at the school infirmary, someone who hated hospitals or infirmary in general, he tried to get up to check if anyone was there. Just as he was about to rise, a dragon demon entered the room and forced him back down, scolding him to stay in bed if he ever wanted to leave. He tried to make him understand that he could stay seated and he had promised never to get out of bed again. With a pitiful look in his eyes and feeling somewhat human that day, Mrs. Pomfrey let him sit down on the condition he wouldn't get up at all. The only problem was that after 5 minutes of sitting doing nothing, Harry grew extremely bored and started regretting not being able to get up. Fortunately for him, his parents came to visit. They were overjoyed to see their son awake and in good spirits, despite his inability to get out of bed, a condition his mother had agreed upon, even though he kept getting mistaken for a nurse. He talked at length with them before finally asking how he'd somehow ended up in the infirmary. Just as awkward, feeling uneasy, Tony explained to his son that his despicable cousin Dudley had beaten him until he lost consciousness. He assured his son that Dudley would be allowed to stay at school, but added that he had taken measures to ensure Tony's education at Hogwarts would be completely safe, allowing him to walk freely through the castle without being attacked. "So what's this awesome method, Dad?" Harry asked, Great father, your uncles can stay here to teach the wizards and humans some basic tricks, Tony replied cheerfully. Seriously? That's awesome. Oh, and by the way, the term is Nemdu, Dad, Harry exclaimed, now bursting with energy to run around the castle grounds 5 times. Yeah. We'll be teaching on Sundays. Steve will teach a physical training course. Bruce will work with the amazing potion professor named Severus Snape, since chemistry is pretty similar to potions. Tony said this with a grimace, still remembering the fresh memory of Snape. Not all that's done yet. Thor will teach flying lessons with Professor Babine. I think that was his name. And I'll be teaching math classes. We've also managed to make Loki follow you everywhere without his cat form. He ended up grinning. Harry knew his father would make sure he skipped math classes during school, but that was the only reason they could stay in the castle and he had to remain within its grounds. They couldn't visit the magical village or enter the forbidden forest, since it was off-limits to everyone except Hagrid. Still, Harry was thrilled that his family would teach at Hogwarts and Loki would be able to stay with him during class. They kept talking for several minutes until Pepper warned her to leave, as she needed to continue managing Stark Industries while the boss was away. After Pepper left, Harry's friends joined them, having just learned he was in the infirmary with a serious injury. They stayed until they had to return to class. Then the next companions were his uncle, specifically Thor with his ever-present radiant smile, Steve and Bruce. Mrs. Pomfrey, observing the 3 uncles and Tony's interactions, found them reminiscent of the Marauders she had admired as Minerva. She clearly saw that her 4 in school would cause chaos, and she was already grinning at the prospect. She glanced at her colleagues' faces. Coming out of her reverie, she told the group that Harry needed to rest if he wanted to get out of here as quickly as possible. The week flew by, and Harry finally got out of the infirmary. No need to return anytime soon, though he'd long thought it might be forever. His father, now overly protective, escorted him out to the dining room. When they arrived, Harry said goodbye to his father and went to sit with his friends at the Gryffindor table. Tony smiled when he saw his son in the House of Red and Gold, their favorite colors, knowing he hated them but just teasing his father. Clearing his mind, he headed over to join his friends at the teacher's table. The students noticed 4 adults sitting at the teacher's table, which piqued their curiosity. When the meal was over, the principal called the students' attention. Hello, or should I say good evening. Please stay seated for a moment, as today I'm excited to introduce 4 new teachers and a new student. Here's Mr. Tony Stark, who will teach math on Sundays for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders. Mr. Thor Odinson will assist Professor Bybine in her teaching duties. Mr. Stephen Rogers will be your PE teacher, with his schedule displayed in the shared classroom. Finally, Mr. Bruce Banner will assist Professor Snape during his classes. Now, without further delay, I would ask Mr. Lawfeson to come up here for his distribution. Dumbledore is done for. A boy around 13 years old stepped onto the stage, drawing admiring glances from some girls. His jet-black hair was styled with Draco Malfoy-style gel, and his green eyes sparkled with commanding power. Though he carried an air of aloofness, a gentle kindness shone through his gaze. He settled into the stool as the professor, McGonagall, placed the sorting hat on his head, and he exclaimed, "Serpentard!" The Serpentard table welcomed him warmly. Dumbledore declared that the school year was now over and they could return to their common room. Harry watched his elder brother walk away with the Serpentards, who turned to give his little brother a wink. So Harry let him go off to his new house. With Loki, Loki went to join the Slytherin table and overheard the headmaster telling them they could return to their common room. He was about to go back to his younger brother when he noticed his friend was surrounded by others. Seeing this, Loki gave him a reassuring wink before heading off with the other Slytherins. They made several detours, and he noticed they were all silent except for 3 of them. Loki recognized them as Harry's friends. They arrived at the dungeon and entered their common room. He was delighted to see everything was beautifully arranged, surprised that everything wasn't green and silver but the sofas were ivory white, the walls gray, and the floor made of solid wood. He made his way to the room they had mentioned, only to find himself sharing it with 2 other students. The green sheets came in various shades, and as he had expected, there was no window like in the Gryffindor Tower. He settled into the bed. He thought it was his own, since none of the three had anything on them. As he began unpacking the suitcase his brother Thor had prepared for him, he heard two voices coming toward him, assuming they were from his dorm room. The first voice entered, tall with blonde hair that flowed at the ends and hazel eyes. He stopped speaking when he saw someone in his dorm room with his friend. The other was slightly smaller than the first one, with brown hair and deep brown eyes. He seemed a bit more aggressive than the first one. "You must be the two people I'll have to share this dorm with, right?" Loki asked. "Yeah, I'm Heinrich and him is Weasley. You must be Loki, right?"
Heinrich replied.
"You're a blood purist, aren't you?" Weasley asked. "A blood oath? No way I'd believe that," Loki retorted. "What are you doing in Slytherin anyway? Only purebloods get in there, your parents must be wizards," Weasley said, feeling disgusted by Loki's presence. "Excuse my cousin. He's not used to being around anyone other than pureblood wizards," Heinrich said lazily. Loki lay down and realized he didn't like this Weasley anymore. He stopped thinking about him and instead focused on the person he loved most in the world, his little brother Harry. With Harry, after watching his older brother's figure disappear, Harry began recounting his time in the infirmary and complained about the bandage that kept him there. Curious Hermione asked Harry if his father's presence was due to his accident. And, dummy, Tony and Harry insisted he'd fallen down the stairs and got hurt. "Seriously? Have you even seen those steps? They're downright dangerous." Harry shot back that his dad wouldn't let him study at Hogwarts unless everyone stayed by his side to protect him from any dangers. Unfortunately, a pure-blooded student overheard their conversation and realized the new teachers were Muggle. He stormed off, shouting his outrage. The situation was quickly resolved when Tony shot a glare at the student, warning he'd get a beating if he didn't shut up right now. The next day came swiftly, and Harry, having received all the assignments from his teachers through Hermione, didn't feel like himself. The week he'd just spent in the infirmary had thrown him off balance. To his surprise, even though Loki was 13, he was still in his early teens and seemed to be handling charm and transmutation classes like a pro. Harry was thrilled to see his big brother make friends his age and noticed he wanted him to come over. "He must be introducing me to his new buddies," Harry thought as he approached the Slytherin table. "Hey Loki," Harry said, hugging the oldest one. "Hey Harry, I want to introduce you to my friends," Loki said with a smile. "Loki, who's this guy who looks eerily like the survivor?" asked the man lounging lazily on his left hand. "My brother, as you say, is my little brother. Yes, he's also known as the survivor, but he's still my little brother. Now, Harry, the lazy one who can't even lift his head, is named Heinrich Selwyn. The super cheerful one who never stops eating is Jacob Blade, and the jerk with the ugly head is Weasley Selwyn, Heinrich's cousin. That's Loki. Hey Harry, nice to meet you. You can call me Jake." The cheerful guy said he had hair like his father's brown, but with those clear blue eyes. As for the survivor, he was having a blast with his friends, even though some were missing, and with his entire family present for him. He wondered how Dudley received his gift, having found the photo of himself and Dudley that still sat in the broom closet. Ever since then, he'd kept the photo just in case he ever became someone other than a victim for his cousin. He had always wanted to be friends with his cousin who had it all while he had nothing, though occasionally his aunt managed to give him some food to keep him alive. The other photos Vernon tried to bring into his prison cell, but the guards had confiscated them and sent them to Tony, as he was the person responsible for their imprisonment. When Harry kept the photos in his father's hands, he had initially wanted to return them to Dudley, who might have been interested in his parents' belongings. But Tony told him it was practically impossible to send anything back at this point. So Harry waited and eventually forgot about the photos. Then when he saw his cousin at the distribution ceremony, he remembered the photos and decided to give them back. He asked his father to give him a photo album. After spending days carefully arranging each photo, he finally put them all in the album and decided to give it to him as a Christmas surprise. After unpacking their gifts, something that used to make you go crazy when you had a dad who was both super rich and spoiling, they made their way to the Great Hall. They wanted to enjoy the castle's exquisite cuisine, and also because Ron kept whining about being hungry. As Harry entered the hall, he noticed his cousin seemed lost in thought. When he saw him, the boy looked utterly lost, deep in thought about what he should do next. The survivor cleared his mind and smiled at his father, who was anxiously watching over his son. They ate quietly before heading outside to enjoy the beautiful day, but Harry stayed behind to have a proper conversation with his dear cousin. "Dudley, is everything okay?" Harry asked, genuinely worried about his cousin. "I'm doing well, thanks," said Dudley, grinning. "I need to ask you, how long have you had these photos, and this particular one?" he asked, gesturing at the picture of them as babies, smiling. "We received these photos a few days after your parents were jailed. I found this one when I was 5, and ever since then I've always wanted to be your friend even though you never loved me. I've always dreamed of the day we could become like the babies in that photo, with the note hanging behind it," Harry replied, taking the photo from Dudley's hand and gazing at the memory with a melancholic smile. "Thank you really, Harry.
I'm truly grateful.
I'll always be here for you if you need me," Dudley said, giving a tender hug before heading back to his shared room with a smile. The young Stark looked at his cousin with utter confusion. He had expected Dudley to reject him again, but this version of the situation was better than what he'd imagined. He decided to join his family in their Quidditch game. They'd already drawn teams, and the brooms used by Muggles, his family, were enchanted to make them usable. The teams were distinct. The Avengers on one side, with Tony as the catcher, Thor and Steve as the hitters, Clint and Natasha as the pursuers, and Pepper was likely forced to take on the role of the goalkeeper. In the first round, Team Asgard and Team Stark emerged victorious. The next round saw Loyot take on Arachne, while Faucon faced off against Stark. When Arachne pulled out before the match started, Loyot clinched victory, with Stark securing their second win in a row. The matches continued in a round-robin format until every team had faced off against each other. The tournament concluded with Stark team defeating Asgard team to claim the championship title. Asgard team secured first place, followed by Stark team in second place. Arachne team took third place, Loyot team earned fourth, while Faucon team finished as the losing team. After finishing last in their brutal game, Ron and Clint had to ditch their clothes before heading out for a walk on the castle's icy grounds before making their way to Professor McGonagall's office. The poor professor was preparing for her next lecture when someone started banging on her door. She couldn't figure out who could be disturbing her. When she opened the door, she nearly fainted upon seeing one of her students Gryffindor with another man. After the initial shock wore off, she scolded both boys. She couldn't call Clint a man anymore after his immature behavior, then gave a restrained look to her trembling Gryffindor who was shivering from fear and cold. After being reprimanded by McGonagall, the losers headed to their place of death, more commonly known as the dungeon of their beloved potions professor. Though they feared the potions master's punishment even more than McGonagall, they still went through with it. They had joined the game like other teams that might have lost, determined to see it through. Severus was correcting his clueless students' essays. They didn't know the subtle art of potion making. When he heard faint knocking at his door, he wondered who could be disturbing him. The sight of two losers made him nearly sick and forced them to clean the classroom floor with nothing but their underwear and a toothbrush. They had to use their sweat too. They cleaned with water, as the glass of water the professor had given them wasn't enough to clean the rest of the classroom. They couldn't finish before sunset and ended up spending the entire night in the dungeon cleaning the floor, because the devilish professor wanted the floor to shine and wouldn't let them leave until it was polished to perfection. They ended up in the afternoon of the following day, both completely drained from the exhaustion of their muscles and the natural wear and tear after the matches, having stayed awake all night. The two cousins set out to find Tony and Pepper, only to discover them near the exit of the magical station. The young pair seemed to be searching everywhere for the two others who were supposed to join them. Tony was the first to spot Harry and Dudley approaching. He pointed them out to Pepper, who instinctively became protective. The protective matriarch immediately embraced Harry, asking how he was doing. Unbeknownst to her, this made Harry feel uneasy, and some people couldn't help but laugh at her pointed stares. Tony watched Dudley, who seemed visibly uncomfortable in front of them, but noticed he was doing everything he could to protect his cousin. Their eyes met, and Tony could see Dudley harbored some resentment toward his parents. The millionaire pulled his son into his arms and told Dudley not to feel awkward, assuring him he was part of the family and that the rest of them wouldn't hold a grudge. Well, almost. After all, Harry had forgiven him for what he'd done, and they would forgive him too. Dudley expressed gratitude to Harry and vowed to show appreciation for his uncle. He realized his parents' imprisonment wasn't his fault, understanding they might have been preparing for the consequences after abusing Harry. They left the station and headed to the manor Harry had received as a gift for his 11th birthday. When Dudley arrived, he was stunned by the grandeur of the estate, wondering how a parent could give such lavish gifts for just a birthday celebration. But he thought Harry deserved it and couldn't blame him for being spoiled. At least he wasn't acting like some arrogant rich kid. They say that if his parents hadn't gone to prison, he would have been just as spoiled, but he could have become a true monster of arrogance and perhaps even a bully in the same way his father raised him wouldn't have been surprising. Tony told them they'd stay at the manor for the rest of the day and would depart early the next morning and arrive by afternoon. New York. Dudley was going to sleep in Harry's room, so he could feel more at ease in the massive Stark estate. The next morning, Tony woke up the two boys sharing the same bed. At first, he was worried about Harry, but Dudley reassured him that he wouldn't harm Harry in any way. If he said he didn't like this Dudley better than the one he saw with the Dursleys and Tony Stark for the first time, he'd be lying. Though Tony Stark was multifaceted, lying about his son's safety would be not on the list. He trusted the last Dursleys and let them sleep together. He found them in Harry's oversized king-size bed, where Dudley was holding his son in protective arms as he slept peacefully. He woke Dudley first because he wanted the boy to release his son. Only Dudley could hold Harry this way, and then he woke Harry up. After fully waking up, Harry and Dudley went to the kitchen for their lunch. After enjoying a delicious meal cooked by Pepper, Tony informed them they needed to pack their bags in an hour. Meanwhile, Tony had already gone to the family. Dudley went to the manor to retrieve his vacation belongings left behind. Afterward, the two cousins set off to pack their luggage for New York, a trip Dudley had been eagerly anticipating. The family headed to the airport and boarded Tony's private jet, which had been waiting for them since the day before. However, Tony decided to let the two boys rest before the trip. The journey was long, but they finally arrived in New York. When they stepped out of the car, a car was waiting to take them to the Stark Tower. When Dudley saw the cars waiting for him, he wondered how much Tony Stark's fortune was worth. But upon seeing the Stark Tower, his doubts vanished. He'd realized he'd never have that kind of money in 1,000 years. Inside the tower, he recognized their assistant Professor Potion, Bruce Banner, and wondered how his uncle and he had met. He couldn't see Bruce's kind heart blending with Stark's endless arrogance, which made them work together seamlessly. Harry discovered that his uncle and Bruce were part of the globally recognized superhero group, the Avengers. Finally, Dudley realized that the heroes standing before him were the ones who had saved the world years ago. He understood that Tony was the legendary Iron Man, their PE teacher was Captain America, and Loki, Harry's brotherly figure, was the villain who had tried to bring the world to his knees. The billionaire looked at his nephew and shook him gently to bring him back to Earth. After confirming he was back, he showed him his room where he would stay during the vacation. Dudley followed his uncle and cousin, who introduced him to the friend room with a stunning view of the city. He thanked Tony and Harry for letting him stay with them, especially after all he had done against Harry. "Dud, are you still mad about that?" Harry asked Dudley. "Yeah, Harry. How could I not feel remorse? I sent you to the infirmary. You were literally dying and I knew it all too well. Yet instead of raising a finger against me, you forgave me and even gave me the greatest gift I'd received in years." Dudley tearfully confessed before Harry and Tony. "And you? I could have killed your son, but you let me come here when you didn't have to show even a shred of kindness. That I should hate you for turning my life into a living hell and sending my parents to jail. Yet you still show kindness toward me. Why is that?" "Because, Dudley, you're part of our family, and I treat my family with love and respect, unless you take it out on them. Let's be real. I don't think you deserve all my kindness, but if Harry's going to go out of his way for you, I'll do the same. Plus, you've changed so much since the start of the year. That's why I respect you and appreciate who you've become. Whatever you think, you're now part of the family. If I told you others would accept you, I'd be lying to you, just as easily as Pepper, Bruce, and myself." Tony responded by looking into Dudley's eyes and speaking with complete honesty. The young Moldovan boy looked at Tony, tears streaming down his cheeks as he tried to hold them back. Without a word, he threw himself into Tony's arms and began recounting his years of hardship with thousands of foster families. When he finally regained his composure, he met his new family with the brightest smile and said with utmost sincerity, "Thank you." Harry watches his cousin smile, a genuine smile that's neither fake nor forced. He returns the smile, thinking to himself that his vacation is going to be absolutely fantastic. "Stand up inside there. Come on, Harry, Dudley, wake up," shouted Tony Stark in the hallway between the boys' rooms. The young Stark sprang up, muttering how he'd make his father pay. He knew he hated being woken up during his vacation, but Tony never listened. Despite his body's protests and the headache starting to set in, Harry got out of bed and left his room at the same time his cousin did. One thing they both discovered was that they refused to get up before at least 9.5 hours. Enjoying the comfort of their beds in the morning was something they both cherished. With a brief nod, they headed to the tower's kitchen to join Tony and Bruce, who were still up early. Bruce understood why Tony got up so early, but Tony remained a mystery to them. Pepper, like every morning, would wake up around 5 to head off to work. She occasionally stayed until the two boys woke up, though that was rare. When they entered the kitchen, their eyes fixed on Tony with knives in sight. If a glance could kill, the millionaire would have died. Bruce watched his best friend grin foolishly, while their young children stared at the first man with murderous intent. He couldn't help but think his friend was a child in an adult body and sighed gently toward him. He suggested they make some eggs. After serving up baked potatoes with bacon, the young men stopped staring at Tony and turned their hungry eyes toward Bruce, who chuckled gently. Bruce began preparing their lunch while the two boys eagerly awaited it. Not just because Bruce made meals fit for the gods, but also because Tony couldn't cook a decent meal. In the end, Bruce served both boys and Tony, though he would never admit it. But Tony found Bruce's food way better than Pepper's or his own. The three of them devoured their lunches, while the doctor calmly ate his meal, smiling at his adoptive family. As they kept eating, Tony couldn't help but ask his son a question. "Okay, what are we doing today?" Tony asked impatiently to Harry, who was still eating his meal. "I don't know, Dudley, what would you like to do?" Harry asked between bites. "What do you think about the zoo?" demanded Dudley, pondering what they could possibly do. "That would be fun. Let's go to the zoo," Harry said, his eyes darting at Tony with that dog-like gaze. "Okay, let's go to the zoo," said Tony, his eyes glazed over by his son's gaze. "I hope you'll have a good time," said Bruce with a smile. "What's the deal with you? You're coming along with us." "I absolutely can't go there alone with them," Tony said, locking eyes with his best friend. Seeing his godson and Dudley staring at him with that lost puppy eyes look, he admitted defeat and agreed to go along. He knew Tony didn't like zoos, but Tony knew Tony didn't like going around in public without proper cover. But he also understood Bruce would do anything for Harry, even if it meant showing up at public venues. After finishing their lunch, they changed and washed up for their outing. It was rare for them to go out together, especially with Bruce around, but Tony couldn't take it anymore. The two boys looked like demons to their father's eyes when they were together. As Harry was finishing his outfit, his father came knocking on the door of his bedroom. "Enter," Harry said, glancing at the person banging on his door. "Harry, why don't you invite your two friends? They called while you were at Hogwarts to check in, and I think it would be good for Dudley to have more people around him," said Tony. "Okay, I'll call them. If they want to, I'll set up a meet-up at the park," Harry replied, beaming at his father with a radiant smile. When Tony left his room, Harry called his two best Muggle friends, and both agreed to join him at the zoo. He went to meet Dudley without mentioning his friend's arrival, thinking it would make him happy. The four of them got into Tony's car, and Happy, Tony's driver, took them to the zoo. As they entered, Harry found his two friends bickering with each other. Nothing changes, Harry thought as he joined his friends. Seeing him approach, the two boys stopped bickering and turned to embrace him, since he was shorter than them. Meanwhile, Dudley wondered who those two boys were who seemed to know his cousin. One of them was tall enough to pass as a 17-year-old. He had platinum blonde hair with a slight curl and pale blue eyes that were too light to look real. They said he had an angelic face. The other boy was just slightly taller than Harry, with hair of the same color. The other boy had blonde hair, but his eyes were olive green with a hint of pale blue, and his hair was straight. It was at this moment that Harry decided to introduce both boys to his cousin. Dud, let me introduce you to two of my best friends. The big one, actually the biggest one, is Lucas Smith, and the other is Max Klaus. Max, Lucas, I'm introducing my cousin Dudley, Harry said with a smile to his cousin and friends. After the introductions, Harry dragged his family and friends into the zoo. Dudley, Max, and Lucas were engrossed in intense discussions, while Tony and Bruce were debating science during their competition. They first visited the lions, not just saw them, but actually observed them with particular fascination. Dudley chuckled at Harry's fascination with the animals. Then they saw the monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. Tony, the film buff, compared these poor primates to the movie Planet of the Apes, though it wasn't his fault, just wanted to hear them talk. Bruce, on the other hand, was spellbound by the dolphins, gazing at them with rapt attention, much like Dudley had found it fascinating to watch a giraffe. Lucas and Max seemed completely fascinated by the tigers' interactions with each other. Finally, they made their way to the zoo's reptile house, where they saw all sorts of reptiles, lizards of every size and color. But the real showstopper came when Harry spotted an absolutely stunning snake. Compact enough to fit into his sweater and blend in, its black scales shimmered under the artificial lighting. When he moved, golden glimmers danced across the scales, while his own green eyes mirrored the snake's vibrant green. Harry stared at the snake with a strange fascination, leaving him alone while his family and friends went off to observe other reptiles they found more interesting than the snake. Then something unexpected happened that the survivor hadn't anticipated. It's getting tiresome to see you staring at me so intensely, young soul, the serpent hissed. You're talking. How's that even possible? Harry exclaimed in surprise, seeing a snake actually speaking. You might ask me the same thing, young man. How does he speak our noble tongue? The snake hissed, intrigued. I don't know. Is that normal? Harry asked anxiously. No, you should be proud to speak the noble tongue. Very few can do it. Young man, I have another question if that doesn't bother you. Sifla the seeing snake noticed Harry, showed no resistance, and continued. Could you take me back with you? I'm bored here doing nothing all day. That's not noble for a snake of my caliber. Take him back? How? You're in a cage and I can't even see myself. Hold on. I'll be right back, Harry said as he left to fetch his father. The young Stark searched the animal house for his father. When he found him, he asked if they could buy one of the zoo's animals. An animal from the zoo? Which one? A lion, because if it's a lion, I'm not sure if we'll have enough meat for him or enough space for his habitat, Tony said, looking intrigued as he gazed at his son. No, not a lion, Dad. This is something a bit smaller. I want a snake, Harry demanded with those big, dog-like eyes that only he could muster. Okay, which snake? Then why not a pet store one? Asked Tony. Because this one's a bit special and I don't want a pet from a pet store. Follow me. I'll show you what I'm after, Harry replied, leading his father and godfather to the cage of the black snake. That one. Well, I don't want to make you sad, Harry, but the profile says he's extremely venomous, Bruce said while glancing at the snake's file. Dad, please, this is very important to me, Harry said, knowing that if he told his father this, he already knew he'd won. Okay, I'll ask the owner if he can give me a quote for the snake. But here's the deal. If you make even the slightest dangerous move, I'll shoot it down. Got it? Tony said seriously about his family's safety. Got it. Thanks, Dad, Harry said with a smile to his father. The millionaire smiled at his son and sighed as he gently stroked his hair. He then went to see one of the zookeepers to request an audience with the zoo owner. Meanwhile, young Stark set out to find his friends and cousin, only to discover the three were arguing in a souvenir shop. He warned them they'd leave when his father returned from the owner's office. The boys exchanged puzzled glances, wondering what was going on. When Tony was in the owner's office, they kept muttering that they'd probably find out when he left. In the office, Tony was negotiating with the owner who cared deeply about every animal in his zoo. After Tony raised the price, he finally managed to buy the snake for a modest $10,000. Though the owner warned him to handle it with extreme care. Now that the owner had given his consent, the zookeeper brought the snake into a cage and provided a list of what it needed to eat and survive. But Harry ignored the instruction. She snatched the cage from his father's hand and kept staring at it. The snake himself was whistling thanks to Harry. The other three boys who had been wondering what Tony was doing in the owner's office finally got answers when they spotted a box containing the snake Harry had stared at for ages. But they remembered the snake's profile said it was highly venomous. They tried convincing Harry to return it to the owner, but the young Stark ignored them and kept insisting everything was fine. However, Tony made sure his son promised not to open the box until they were safely transported to the tower. Before heading straight to the tower, Happy made a detour to the house of Lucas and Max, who lived together. Dudley asked why they lived together when they didn't share the same last name, and he explained that Max was an orphan the Lucas family had found in Germany. Despite already having a 1-year-old brother, Lucas had forged a friendship with Max and managed to convince his parents to take the orphan with them. Finally, they arrived at Stark Tower and entered one of the Avengers' massive training chambers. Big enough for the Hulk to wreak havoc without completely destroying the tower. He finally opened the box, and the snake, recognizing its master, climbed up to his new owner's shoulders. This terrified Tony terribly, but Harry assured him the snake wouldn't harm him. He explained that he understood the snake's words and, in a way, could even speak in its language. Naturally, the three didn't believe him and wanted to see what he meant. "Speak to me in my tongue, young man," hissed the serpent. With a nod of his head, Harry began to speak. "If I speak like that, do you think they'll believe me?" Harry whistled. "If I saw their faces, I'd say yes." The snake hissed and chuckled slightly as it saw the disheveled faces of its master's family. "Oh, by the way, what's your name?"
I'm Harry Stark.
"Your profile said you're from Poland, right?" Harry whistled. "Yeah, you can call me Yaric, young Master Harry." Yaric whistled. "Harry, I don't want to interrupt you, but what were you thinking?" Bruce asked, still reeling from hearing a son-in-law speaking to a serpent. "Oh, he told me his name. He's Yaric. Yaric, this is my family. The big fool is my dad Tony, who's the reason you're with me. The one talking to me was my godfather Bruce, and the youngest is my cousin Dudley. If possible, you shouldn't attack them, okay?" He replied to Bruce while whistling at Yaric. "Actually, never attack anyone in the tower or anywhere without my permission. Okay, young Master Harry," sifflered Yaric. When he promised his family Yaric wouldn't attack anyone, his father concluded they could all return to the kitchen for dinner. Still, the family members weren't immediately convinced by the little snake, but thankfully he didn't take offense. Pepper wasn't thrilled about the news of the snake now living with them, but she made an extraordinary effort because she saw in her son's eyes how much it meant to him. That a week passed, during which the family gradually began trusting the harmless little snake. Then came Thor and Loki's unexpected visit, though unfortunately, he was still in his teenage form. The sight of the snake slightly frightened Thor, who couldn't help but mutter how foolish it was. Then he started talking to the serpent himself. "Hello, little snake. How did you find Harry?" Loki whistled gently. "Loki, you can talk to Yaric too. That's awesome." Harry whistled cheerfully. Harry explained to Loki that he had found him at the zoo and heard his story. Then Yaric had asked him to take him along. He did so with delight. Loki, however, explained to Harry and his family that he could strangely speak Forkalang, a language only certain individuals possess. He elaborated. The last person on Midgard Terra to speak to him was the dark mage who had killed Lily and James, then tried to kill Harry when he was 1 year old and again last year. When Harry learned this, he was terrified, especially upon discovering that modern wizards consider Forkling to be a language used by dark mages. This realization came after Salazar Serpentard, one of the wizards who could speak this language, passed it down to his descendants. When Stark learned the news, he was torn. Was he thrilled to speak the language or terrified of being labeled a dark wizard or a descendant of Salazar Slytherin? He figured there must be a way to determine if he shared his bloodline, but since he wasn't sure such a thing existed, he decided to ask a fellow wizard friend. Perhaps they'd have some clue. Fortunately, The next time he saw his friends, as planned, within a week or two, they would gather at Ron's house to discuss those first weeks. With Yaric still weighing on his mind, Harry drifted off to sleep, lost in these thoughts. "Young Master Harry, wake up! I sense your father approaching." Yaric whistled softly. Thanks to Yaric, his loyal snake and companion, he managed to get up before his father smashed the door like a mental fool. He had started waking his son this way about a week ago. Fortunately, he wasn't the only one suffering from his father's foolishness. His cousin Dudley had a similar treatment to wake him up, but unfortunately, he had no one to warn him when Tony was about to smash their door that he narrowly avoided his father, who was about to deliver what he and Dudley had nicknamed the death hug, a technique where one of the boys would kiss until the other stopped breathing. There were days when the two boys wondered how Tony had learned such a gruesome skill. Tony tried to grab his son but failed, glancing at him with a frown. "Harry, why did you do this to me? I thought you loved me," Tony said, tears welling up in his eyes. "Come on, Dad. You know that little thing doesn't work on me anymore," Harry replied, kissing his father affectionately, who gently returned the gesture. "Okay, get ready, buddy. Your friend Ron's coming to pick us up today via a magical mode of transportation, right?" "You bet." Tony grinned with a wide smile. His son returned his smile and told his father not to wake Dudley, as he would do it himself and also prevent him from being suffocated by his father's love. He hurried to dress, then quietly woke his poor cousin, who was still asleep, unaware of the impending danger. That morning, Dudley couldn't decide whether he'd rather be awakened by Tony's affection through being crushed or by Yaric climbing up his leg. In either case, he'd prefer sleeping as he pleased and being roused by the bird's morning song. After several minutes of calming his breathing, Dudley dressed and went to join his cousin in the kitchen, where Yaric was waiting. The two of them looked at him with that mischievous glint in their eyes. This time he let her pass, but even though he knew it was completely impossible, he kept his promise to take revenge on them later, so he stayed silent. Today, they were supposed to stay at Ron's house for a few weeks before school started. His father was supposed to come and pick them up using a magical transport, but the real twist came when Ron's dad asked Tony if they had a fireplace. Their uncle had said they did, and Ron's dad then told them to wait outside the fireplace as promised. Harry, Dudley, and Tony stood before the tower's lone fireplace, waiting for something to happen. Then green flames erupted from the chimney. The three recoiled in terror at the sight, with the two cousins clinging to Tony as he tried his best not to call out his armor. Then suddenly, they heard voices coming from the chimney. Ron's father emerged from the green flames, covered in dust. But he wasn't alone. He was accompanied by the twins and Ron. "Ron! Fred, George!" Harry exclaimed as he threw himself into Ron's arms. "Hey, Dud, how's it going?" Ron exclaimed excitedly when he saw his two friends. "Ron, I don't want to cut your reunion short, but we need to leave before it's too late." "Harry, Dudley, are you ready?" Mr. Weasley asked calmly. "Yep." The two cousins chimed in at the same time. "I'll be heading to England in a few weeks to check on how you two are doing. Dudley, be kind to the Weasley family. Don't do anything silly. Keep Harry from making pointless mistakes. Harry, don't give too much trouble to the Weasley family. Keep Yaric close to you and don't lose him. And most importantly, stay smart." "Got it, both of you?" Tony asked the two children, who were smiling innocently. "Promise," the two cousins replied, still as innocent as ever. "Yaric? Who's Yaric?" Ron asked, confused. "Important person," Harry replied with a smile, hearing Jaric's protests that only he could hear. Ron's father gave the two boys some chimney powder, even though they had no idea what it could do. When Harry and Dudley told Arthur they didn't know the powder's purpose, he decided Ron would go back with Harry to pick up Dudley, while Fred and George would return with their suitcases. Young Stark felt Yaric wrap around his forearm for better comfort, watched his friend take a handful of powder, then shouted the terrier, in a loud voice. He saw the green flames from earlier engulfing them as they were carried toward their new destination. Fearing being burned alive, Harry closed his eyes and felt a sudden grip that knocked him to the ground. Opening his eyes, he realized he wasn't in his home but in a new house. Noticing Mrs. Weasley came to greet them. She asked them to step away from the fireplace to make room for Dudley and Arthur, who were expected to arrive shortly after. As they stepped back, the green flames returned, and through these flames emerged Mr. Weasley and his cousin. Without waiting, Fred and George appeared above their father and Dudley, carrying the cousins' suitcases. Their arrival was met with Mrs. Weasley's scolding for their inappropriate behavior and for leaving too soon. After scolding the twins, who remained completely unaffected by their mother's anger, Ron went upstairs to show them where they would sleep, which turned out to be his bedroom with 2 extra beds. The twins were punished to weed their garden, a punishment they seemed to dread seeing their faces and protests, but Mrs. Weasley refused to give them another penalty. The 3 friends spent their afternoon watching the twins try to catch the mischievous gnomes, who seemed smarter than the twins' combined brains. But in the end, the twins' cunning outsmarted them. The poor gnomes. Then, they spent the rest of the day avoiding the twins, who tried to make them regret their joy at seeing them suffer. Thankfully, they managed to avoid them and could sleep without distress. Harry thought about his family, who were surely worried about him, and decided he would write as soon as possible. Then he remembered asking Ron if he knew a spell to determine someone's family tree. The next morning, he was woken by Molly, Ron's mother, and wondered why Yaric hadn't warned him earlier. Sure, she didn't wake them up like her father did, but he'd wanted to hear Yaric gently rouse him, as only he knew how to do it. He thought maybe Yaric had gone off on a trip and would return later that day, but what happened left him terrified for his friend. Shortly after being woken up by Molly, the 3 boys went down to the kitchen where an enormous lunch, almost as big as Hogwarts, was waiting. It was ready to be eaten or devoured by Ron, but there were only them. The twins, Molly and Percy, Ron's older brother, since Arthur had already. Part 1 went to work while his brothers no longer lived in the family home. Halfway through their grand feast, they heard a scream coming from the terroir building. Rushing to the source, they found it in the room of Ron's younger sister Ginny. When she saw her mother, she threw herself into her arms and pointed toward the bed. Harry approached and spotted her terrified little snake. "Yaric!" Harry exclaimed as he spotted his serpent. "Harry, you know that snake?" Ron asked, looking pale at the sight of the serpent. "Does he even know?" "They've been together since last week," Dudley exclaimed, no longer thinking about his cousin's snake. "When did he start hanging out with us?" "He was always with us, but he was just wrapped around my arm," Harry replied with an innocent smile. "Is it dangerous?" Molly asked anxiously. "No," he replied honestly, "unless I tell him to do it." "How can you expect him to do that if you tell him to? Can he even understand you?" Molly asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "Yeah, I can totally relate to that," Harry replied, his smile fading as he wore a serious expression. "Harry, do you know who the last person to live here was?" "Who do you think it was?" Ron asked, terrified that his friend might be a Forchelang. "Yeah, I know. That's exactly why I want to find out if there's a spell that can reveal your family tree." Harry asked Molly and Ron again, still sounding so serious. "I don't know if such a thing exists. You should ask Arthur when he'll return," Molly replied, not thinking Harry was obscure because of the Forkslinger. "What's your snake's name?" "Yaric. He says hello," Harry replied, speaking to Yaric. Molly agreed to let Yaric stay in their house, but he had to promise not to attack anyone even though Harry had assured him otherwise. He was completely safe. She told him she'd speak with Arthur about the snake, but it didn't bother her much. Besides, Harry mentioned eating rats, though he promised Yaric wouldn't attack Croutard, the family's rat. Ron didn't speak to Harry again for the rest of the day. The rest of the family also found the youngest son's behavior odd, but they didn't think anything more of it than necessary. The twins were determined to hear Harry speak in Forchelang to verify his honesty. They showed him a card, and Yaric had to read it aloud while Harry turned his back to the card, making him unable to understand its message. The little snake with precision could then articulate what was written on it. He had marked something on the map because he couldn't read it, a detail the twins had forgotten. Yet they were satisfied with the map's precise imagery and left him alone. Still, Ron kept avoiding him like the plague, while Harry decided to provoke him to see what was going through his mind. "Ron, before you start running away from me, I want you to listen," the young Stark asked, and seeing the red-haired boy wasn't trying to escape, he continued. I know you're having a hard time accepting I speak Forkalang, but I'm still me, Harry Stark. You need to stop trusting those stereotypes. Just because I speak Forkalang doesn't mean I'm a dark wizard. Draco's a Slytherin and he's not that bad. In fact, he's actually very kind. So why are you avoiding me like this? Oh, I don't know. Did I panic? It was the first time I'd ever seen someone speak Forchalang. My parents used to tell me that Tuseiska had the ability to speak it. Forchalang and I teamed up with Tuseiska, I think. Sorry, Harry, I was such a fool. I shouldn't have tried to avoid you so much. Ron replied, embarrassed by his own foolishness. Okay, now that this is over, would you like to play a game of wizard chess? Harry asked with a radiant smile. Harry's friends smiled at young Stark as they started playing chess. Unfortunately for Harry, Ron was a complete chess whiz. He could beat Bruce in a decent day. The Avengers were stunned to see Bruce getting beaten, since he was the team's top chess player and had even taught Harry how to play. But Ron just was better at it. The only person who gave the red-haired boy a fair share of the fun was Draco, since chess and Quidditch were his favorite games, just like Ron's. The good thing about playing with Ron was that he had to use his whole brain, so time passed way faster this way. Then Yaric and Dudley would occasionally help him out, as everyone wanted to see the red-haired boy lose at his own game, though it sounded pretty selfish. Finally, Arthur returned from the ministry, and Harry decided to wait until later in the evening to ask about his family tree. He wanted to discuss it privately, as he didn't want his friends around if he discovered any dark secrets about his lineage. The perfect moment finally arrived. Mr. Weasley, may I ask you a question? Harry asked. Yeah, of course. Harry, and I beg you, call me Arthur. I think this spell is about tracing your family tree, right? Arthur replied with a smile, having understood Harry's intentions. How do you know? Harry asked, confused. Would you have thought Molly wouldn't tell me about this before? Then I know how kids act after having so much. You shouldn't worry about the Forkalang. You know some people see your talent as a blessing even in the light. Arthur replied with his trademark smile. Oh, thank you, but you didn't answer my question. Harry asked timidly, his face glowing with hope as it grew stronger in his heart.
Ah, no, sorry, Harry.
I don't know any spells to fix your little problem, Arthur replied. Okay, thanks anyway, Mr. Arthur. Harry said, his smile fading slightly. But I know people who might know, Arthur said, placing a reassuring hand on the young Stark's shoulder. What? Harry demanded, feeling hope rising within him. The goblins of Gringotts. There's hardly anything they don't know. We could go in a week or so, and by then you'll have received your annual shopping lists. Then we can all shop together, Arthur replied with a smile to Harry. Now that he had his answer, Harry went to bed with Yaric, who had been coiled around his forearm all along. He was eager to reach Gringotts, remembering how his father had refused. The first time he encountered them was because he didn't trust them, and on one hand he was right. In truth, almost no one in the magical world trusted goblins. Those who did trust them never gave them full authority. Yet Harry couldn't fathom why they harbored such suspicion. Still, he figured that since he was about to meet them in person, he'd give them his own association to the goblins. The cold. It was bitterly cold, yet simultaneously unbearably hot. The darkness stretched endlessly, but a blinding light flickered in the distance. Unconsciously, he began sprinting toward the glow, yet couldn't reach it. As he drew near, a cruel laugh pierced the air while bloodshot eyes scanned the pitch-black void. Then suddenly, the red eyes vanished and a man appeared before him instead. But he couldn't see his face, only those crimson eyes blazed with intense light. Who are you? He demanded. A young man. The only response he received was a less demonic and warmer laugh. Then he felt a hand on his head, and everything turned black as he felt himself departing. Harry jerked awake from his bizarre dream, clutching his chest as his heart pounded like a broken machine. Sensing his master's distress, Yaric coiled around the young Stark's arm and whistled softly to calm him down. Though the little snake kept soothing his breath, the master's tears still trickled silently, while Harry gradually regained his composure. Master Young, please calm down. That was just a nightmare. Please stop crying, pleaded the little snake, worried about its master. Well, This wasn't a nightmare. It was, well, I felt like, but Harry whistled to his snake that had grown quite attached to him. Then why are you crying if you were feeling good? Asked the poor little snake, confused. Because I didn't want him to be alone. He felt so isolated, yet seeing me made him feel complete. The heir of Stark Industries responded. You feel lonely, young master? Yaric asked, equally perplexed. Gee, I don't know. Harry replied, feeling utterly useless. The little snake left its young master in his thoughts, feeling sad for not being able to help the person he had sworn to protect, and couldn't do anything to make him feel better. As for the young Stark, he fell into his own thoughts when he sensed Yaric's abandonment. He didn't want his young friend to feel bad, but couldn't help thinking about the person from his dream. He wondered if he should tell his parents, but he knew this would only make them more anxious about him, so he refused to let their worries escalate beyond what was necessary. He tried to drift back to sleep, but every time he felt himself sinking into dreamland, he'd wake up again, only to see those crimson eyes from the previous nightmare. He couldn't fall back asleep and instead began preparing for the day ahead. He was finally heading to Gringotts, where his parents would meet him at the transit road, along with Hermione, who had just returned from her trip to France with them. To put it simply, he'd spent over 2 weeks at the Weasleys' house with his cousin, during which they received their Hogwarts letters detailing what they needed. When they opened the book, they discovered most of the books they needed to buy belonged to a certain Gilderoy Lockhart, a notorious figure among witches but a fraudster among wizards, with some wondering how he could have been a wizard in the first place. They had set up a meeting at 10 a.m. outside the Wizards' Bank, where they planned to grab some cash to cover all their expenses. Finally, he heard Mrs. Weasley's footsteps heading toward the kitchen. He knew it was her. She always stood first in the group for breakfast and to watch Mr. Weasley leave for the ministry. He got up and followed her. Then, she asked if he could help with anything. At first, she refused, but after several attempts at persuasion, Harry managed to convince her and started setting the table while she cooked calmly. Gradually, the rest of the Weasley family began filling the kitchen with conversations, and laughter began to fill the house, and no one thought to question Harry, who had woken up unusually early compared to his usual mornings when he was often the last to rise. They didn't dwell on it much, as everyone was excited about seeing their friends again at the Hogwarts Express. Instead, they discussed what they'd do once they got there. Finally, the moment arrived when Harry and Dudley were dressed in wizard robes borrowed from Ron and his brothers. They went into the chimney to use the chimney powder, the easiest and fastest way to travel. Harry and Dudley wanted to go alone this time, but after Harry's persistent persuasion, the Weasley parents finally agreed to let them use the chimney powder. Dudley decided to go first and successfully teleported to the leaky track. Ron followed, and Mrs. Weasley then decided that Harry should be the next one to go. Harry had decided to leave Yaric in the terroir for his safety and to avoid alarming any wizards who might see him. He positioned himself at the center of the fireplace, took a puff of the chimney powder, and with the hesitation in his voice, he shouted, "Chemin de traverse." Harry felt the same unease he'd experienced when arriving at terroir, but this time he found himself in a darkened space where the gloomy surroundings made him uneasy. He cursed himself for not bringing his little snake along. At least it would have someone to reassure and protect him from the surrounding darkness. He had always been afraid of the dark of fear that had taken root during his years with the Dursleys, who kept him locked in a closet without any light. He hurried out of the store. He assumed it was a store and dashed through the dim aisles, where a few shady characters loitered. Finally, he stumbled upon an acquaintance. "Hey, what are you doing here? This is dangerous, you could get killed," Draco muttered under his breath. "Drake, I'm glad to see you, but where exactly am I?" Harry still couldn't shake off his fear. "Right now we're in the Misty Path. Let's be real, it's not exactly a great spot. Where were you headed?"
Demanda Draco.
"I was supposed to be on the Hogwarts Express with the others. We'd set up a meeting at Gringotts, but your father kept rejecting all our calls." Harry replied, sounding more confident this time. "You're way off course. That's a kind gesture. Come on. I'll show you the way to Hogwarts," Draco said as he started walking. Feeling more secure, young Harry followed the heir Malfoy. After walking a few streets, they entered an alley with brighter light and more people strolling around. Finally, They reached the front of Gringotts and found Mrs. Weasley and Ginny looking worried. When they saw Harry and Draco approaching them, Mrs. Weasley pulled Harry into her arms and checked if he had any injuries. She told them the others had gone to search for him, and that Tony had nearly had a heart attack when he learned his son was missing. They waited until everyone returned, and when they came back, Tony threw himself into his son's arms. Harry noticed his father's eyes seemed to show he'd cried. Feeling a twinge of guilt for having made his father cry, Harry kissed him and assured him there was no harm since Draco had been with him. When they all gathered together, the worry about Harry dissipated, giving way to the Harry, who had grown accustomed to his parents' mood swings regarding him, took the scolding without much difficulty. Draco left them to join his parents who might have been searching for him, though he didn't dwell on it. Arthur, Tony, Harry, and Hermione's parents returned to Gringotts. The young Stark had already told his father what he wanted to do there, and since he couldn't refuse his son's puppy eyes, he agreed. Arthur asked the goblins if they could identify a wizard's tree. To Harry's relief, they confirmed it was possible but advised him to consult the bank manager directly. When the director agreed to take him through the test, he asked Harry to come with him to a room meant for private sessions. Though all goblins looked old, the director stood out as the oldest. He instructed Harry to place his hand on a weathered parchment with frayed edges. Without warning, the old goblin sliced through Harry's palm in a sudden, unannounced cut. A sudden burning sensation shot through Harry's palm. He tried to stop the bleeding and stem the evil force in his hand, but the director stopped him, insisting the blood must flow onto the parchment. Though he didn't understand why, Harry obeyed. Had he known what would appear on the parchment, he'd have pulled his hand away to tend to his wound instead. Gradually, words began to appear on the parchment. He waited until everything was formed, and the entire composition took shape like a tree bearing his family's biological names. He couldn't read it immediately, as the director grabbed the parchment tip and explained that payment was required to obtain it, since not everyone could perform or know the secret of the enchantment used on the magical parchment. Harry, driven by intense curiosity, handed the old goblin the sum he demanded. The director returned the enchanted parchment that had magically rejuvenated the old man. Then, with delicate care, he gently unfolded it. The tree was magnificent, featuring bold strokes of black, crimson, emerald, and azure, with names in crimson. Young Stark felt a surge of recognition. This was his bloodline. He began reading at the bottom of the parchment where his name, Harold Howard Stark, was written. Few knew this secret, but in reality, the name Tony had inscribed on his certificate was. It was Harold, not Harry. But since nobody called his father Anthony, no one called him Harold either. Harry then checked his parents' names, but what he found was a real revelation. His father's name was clearly written as Anthony Edward Tony Stark, but instead of Lily Evans as he'd expected, it read Lillian Riddle. Not knowing anyone named Lillian Riddle, he turned to the goblin for an explanation. Mister, I think there's a mistake on the parchment. It says my mother's name is Lillian Riddle, but let me tell you, she actually went by Lily Evans. Harry said, gesturing at his family tree to the old goblin. Young man, I can assure you this test is 100% accurate. If it says your mother's name was Lillian, that simply means she was Lillian. As for the name Riddle, I thought the family line had died out after the last descendant who supposedly passed away. The director replied, that makes you a Slytherin descendant. Looking at your family tree, I can see you're also a descendant of Rowena Surdigal. When he picked up the parchment, he discovered his own father was a descendant of Rowena Surdigal, who had an illegitimate child whom she named Stark instead of Surdigal. He couldn't know what she had done with the child, but she must have hidden it to prevent any history books from recording this story. The parents of his mother, whom he couldn't figure out about, were named Tom Marvolo Riddle and Rosemary Riddle. He didn't realize his father knew why his mother was named after the tree. Lillian, but perhaps this Tom Riddle, her grandfather, might have known. Unfortunately, the director's voice made it seem as though his grandparents had died. Then he noticed that the Dursleys, who were also part of his family, weren't listed on the parchment. Suddenly, a wave of fear washed over him. If the Dursleys, who belonged to Lily's family, weren't included, did this mean his mother wasn't really his biological mother? The old goblin watched intently, wondering if the young man was questioning his own existence. Then he decided to ask, feeling a twinge of pity for the youth. Tom Riddle, your grandfather, was a great wizard. Few knew him by that name anymore after an incident, as no one called him by it afterward. Shortly after completing his studies in Powdelrad, he married Rosemary Evans, a talented young witch born in Moldova. Together they had a daughter named Lillian, but after an incident involving the abduction of their daughter and the death of her mother, Tom took a dark turn in his life. The director said, "How do you know that?" Harry asked, tears welling up in his eyes. "I was Mr. Riddle's personal banker and a close family friend. Few people can ally with goblins, and even fewer can claim to be our kin. I never thought I'd find their descendants, but let me tell you, Yaric, the green-eyed grandson of Mrs. Riddle." The director replied, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "What happened to Tom?" Harry asked, noticing the sadness in the old goblin's eyes, thinking this might not have been the smartest move he'd ever made. "This isn't the question I'm supposed to ask, but straight to Tom," the director replied mysteriously. "He's alive?" Harry asked in disbelief. "More or less, you'll have to figure it out yourself. Before you leave, do you want to know if you've inherited anything?" demanded the goblin. "Is it possible?" Harry asked. "It's highly likely you inherited the Potter family properties as James Potter's adopted son, though only a blood test can confirm it. Want to try?" The old goblin asks. "Let me tell you, this one will also need your blood." "Okay," Harry replied, his voice tinged with fear at the mention of blood. The old goblin rose but asked Harry to stay in the room while he fetched what they needed. He returned with a parchment, which was far more beautiful and pristine than the one used for his tree. The only thing they required was a few drops of his blood. When his blood touched the exquisite parchment, it became clear he wasn't just the heir to the Potter family, he was also the heir to Slytherin through his mother, the sole heir to Serdigal through his father, the heir to the Potter family, and the heir to Gryffindor through James Potter, the last heir of Godric. Moreover, combined with his father's fortune, this made him the heir to the Stark family when they deposited a significant sum of money at the bank. As a Slytherin, he inherited 2,557,926 galleons, 13 Morneals, and 23 noises, which amounted to $25,758,323 in US dollars. As a Serdiglory, he inherited 212,161 galleons, 9 Morneals, and 19 noises, which, this amount equated to $2,136,467 in American dollars. He inherited the Potter family estate, consisting of 2,149 galleons, 12 Morneals, and 22 noises, valued at $21,648 in American dollars. As for the Gryffindor estate, he received 224,883 galleons, 10 Morneals, and 13 noises, totaling approximately $2,264,578 in American dollars. However, this wasn't all he inherited from them. He also received manors scattered across the globe, including one in Russia belonging to Salazar Serpentard, and another in England inhabited by the Potter family. The manors he inherited housed house elves who managed the estates and surrounding properties. He discovered that he owned a house in England that was uninhabited except for the house elves, and decided to take a closer look later. The property belonged to Rowena Serdagal, who had gifted it to her illegitimate child in hopes he'd discover his roots someday. To put it simply, besides inheriting his father's billionaire fortune, he'd been a self-made millionaire since birth. He left the room with the old director and young Stark, who were greeted by his father and Arthur, who had been eagerly awaiting their safe exit since the two didn't trust the goblins. He had brought his family tree but would only show it to his father and Arthur, fearing others' reactions. The three went to the Weasley trunk, and both Stark members were saddened to find it completely empty. The youngest of the Starks wondered if he could give money to the Weasley family and asked the goblin accompanying them. Delighted to learn they had no reason to refuse, the goblin offered 100,000 galleons to the Weasleys and instructed the goblin to deposit the funds into their family vault, which he did. Arthur was at a loss for words when he saw all the galleons pop up in his usually empty trunk. He thanked Stark and said they weren't obligated to help. I assure you it's nothing, Tony replied earnestly. And since you've been taking care of Harry for nearly 3 weeks, this is our way of thanking you. Can I get a refund someday? Arthur asked, tears welling up in his eyes. Don't refund us, and I'll appreciate you. Stay with us. Tony replied with a grin that was as silly as it was endearing. The oldest Weasley grabbed a few galleons and the 3 of them left Gringotts. When Molly heard what the Starks had offered, she burst into tears and invited the 2 Starks to stay for dinner at Terroir. With their money, they could buy new notebooks for all their children and new sticks. When they went to buy the requested books, they found the entire store packed as the author of their book, Gilderoy Lockhart, was giving free autographs. Molly and Hermione lined up for a signature, while Harry, Ron, and Ginny, who followed them, wandered around the store. Then they ran into Draco and chatted for ages until Lucius interrupted them, insulted the Weasleys, and took Draco away with him. After meeting Lucius, everything went smoothly. After buying all their supplies, they returned to Terroir. Molly had her biggest dinner ever. Ron noticed his eyes darting away when he saw the food spread out before him. They kept partying late into the night, and Tony, Pepper, and Harry stayed at Terroir overnight. It was too late to head back to the manor in their jagged and no longer dwelling on his dream. Harry drifted back to sleep, feeling his gentle little snake coil around his arm as he blew a lullaby for his master. He found himself in the same spot again, except it wasn't cold anymore. On the contrary, he felt comfortable and warm. He no longer feared the place, though it remained as dark as ever. Strangely, the presence he'd sensed last time reassured him. The reedied figures that had followed him everywhere were gone, and even the cruel laughter had turned warm. He heard a soft whistle and was drawn to it. For some reason, he knew the man in this place was suffering terribly. Please tell me who you are, I want to help, the young boy pleaded. Then suddenly, he sensed a new presence entering his dream, but this one felt strangely familiar. The new presence drove away the old one, the one who had brought him such comfort. Then everything turned cold again, the red eyes returned, and he felt terrified by them. The familiar voice began vehemently opposing the old one, saying, "Leave this place now, or you'll face me. I warn you. Never come back here again, or you'll suffer." The voice roared. The young Stark awoke to feel someone on him. He lifted his eyes and met Loki's green gaze. The god of darkness stared at him with fury, while Yaric stood between them, watching his anxious young master. Harry didn't expect the dream to repeat itself. According to Yaric, he'd started speaking in his sleep, and worriedly went to fetch Loki, who had arrived at the manor the previous day. The manor was packed with Loki, his uncles, and friends who were staying at his place through the summer. They had decided to stay at Harry's mansion since it had multiple rooms and enough space to host an entire army. The 2 Asgardians had returned the day before and couldn't come back earlier because Loki needed to. They helped repair the Bifrost and the damage caused at the castle. Then, they were busy restoring peace across the 9 realms, and finally managed to wrap up everything before school resumed, which meant there was only 1 week left. Harry and his friends were already wondering what prank they'd pull at Hogwarts this year. They were thrilled to learn that Tony and Steve's classes would resume at Hogwarts, and Bruce was returning to study potion-making under Professor Snape. But that wasn't what he needed to focus on right now. Instead, his mind raced with thoughts about Loki's reaction to his dream. The man already seemed furious. "Loki, you're weighing me down," Harry said, not knowing what else to say. "When did you start having this dream? When did it first appear in your dreams?" Loki demanded, still seething with fury. "About a week ago, the day I went to collect my family tree," Harry replied, not wanting to lie to Loki. "Haven't you considered telling someone? This could have been deadly. That person had direct access to your mind and might have done you harm." Loki kept saying this angrily at Harry. "No, I hadn't thought of that. I never realized it was this serious. And I was feeling so good, felt like you were showering me with the same love." "But even stronger," Harry replied, tears streaming down his face. I could feel him hurting, but he seemed so happy to be around me." "Loki, what's happening to me?" the young Stark cried, throwing himself into Loki's arms. "I don't know," Loki replied, "but whoever that person was, they won't haunt you anymore. The young Stark kept sobbing on Loki's shoulder as the latter tried his best to comfort the boy. Loki had often seen their little charge cry whether from joy or sorrow. Harry would burst into tears whenever he realized no one else would share his grief. He'd always remember that first time he saw him weeping. In a day so filled with sorrow, the sky looked strangely beautiful. Despite his hatred for dogs, Loki had adopted a little dog named Thor from Iron Man. The puppy was named Thor because of its blonde coat and big blue eyes. The moment he saw Harry, the dog followed the young man wherever he went, faithfully. Though he didn't know the boy well at the time, the death of the puppy left the young man heartbroken. With tears streaming down his face, he shattered the hearts of his poor family, who stood at a loss for how to comfort him at that moment. Loki had the idea to comfort the little boy by transforming the real Thor into a puppy resembling the old puppy. Seeing his uncle turned into a puppy made Harry laugh, and at the same time it brought back a smile to Loki, just like when he was a child. The tears of sorrow were replaced by tears of joy that day, when he became the young boy's big brother in a special way. Loki would always be grateful for this kindness. That day also marked his vow to keep that smile and laughter on the boy's face forever, so he could never see such sadness in those beautiful eyes again. Despite his promise, he saw Harry crying over something he couldn't understand. He almost went to fetch his stupid older brother and turn him back into a puppy, but then thought it'd be a bad idea to wake him up at this hour of the morning. He didn't want to wake up the whole manor. All he could do now was send warm images of cherished memories, finally feeling Harry calm down. Gradually, he drifted back to sleep in Loki's arms. When he tried to loosen Harry's grip around his waist, the young Stark pulled him closer as if the boy's presence offered comfort. Then he remembered his own childhood memories, how Thor was always the first to comfort him in his bedroom, staying by his side until they both fell asleep together. The only difference was that when he woke up, he didn't like having Thor around him, but with Harry, that little thing hardly bothered him at all. This is how Harry woke up. Loki clung to him as if he were his very life, and not wanting to rouse him, he drifted back into sleep until he finally woke up on his own. When Loki finally rose, he roused Harry, and the two headed to the dining room where they heard voices, some bickering, others laughing. As they entered the room, several heads turned toward them, including Tony and Pepper, who seemed surprised to see them enter together. In truth, surprised was a mild description of Tony's reaction. He was more stunned or even outraged to witness their shared presence. He began questioning or rather threatening Loki, who tried to reassure him by saying they hadn't done anything wrong and that he'd slept with Harry because he'd had a nightmare. But now everything was over. They discovered the quarreling people were none other than Moriana and Aisha in a new conflict, and he wondered when these two would finally agree on something. Fortunately, Hermione calmed them down, allowing them to enjoy Pepper's lunch in peace. The day ended with the friends returning home, or rather, mostly, since Dudley and Aisha didn't have a proper place to call their own. In the end, the week ended without any major events. They were finally set to return to Hogwarts and meet their new defense against the Dark Forces professor. The Weasley twins insisted it had to be Gilderoy Lockhart, since they needed to buy all his books. This thought was met with several protests from the young male wizards in the compartment. Harry understood them, for after reading the requested books himself, he thought no one could be so stupid as to write such absurd things in the books. The girls, however, held the author of the books in deep admiration. Strangely enough, even Hermione grew fond of him, steering the conversation toward a direction that the young wizards were reluctant to pursue. The younger sister, Ron, was in the same compartment as the group of friends had chosen, and Hermione, being Hermione, acted like a wonderful older sister to the other girls. It was hilarious to see how she interacted with the girls with such genuine family-like familiarity. Loki wasn't with them gone to join his friends in the compartment, but before leaving he asked Harry if it bothered him. Not understanding why, the young Stark replied, "Why would that bother me? I'm glad you've made friends," with a smile. Finally, they arrived at Prelord and boarded what looked like horse-drawn carriages. But here's the kicker. There wasn't a single horse to pull them. In fact, nothing was pulling them, they just kept moving on their own. This whole thing was pure fun for the young wizards starting their second year who had never seen anything like it before. Harry wondered if his friends at the House of Gryffindor had ever traveled this way, but he thought back to the detestable Puffing Puff and realized they must have used the same transportation method for their first time. He knew the Weasley family had arrived at the station in their flying car with magically expanded interior, but he didn't know about the other Gryffindor students. He wondered if he even knew what a car was, since during their vacation he learned that wizards almost never used electronic devices. It came as a surprise to the purebloods to see televisions in Harry's manor. The only one who couldn't make it was Draco, as his father didn't want him to associate with them. They arrived at Hogwarts, where every student was supposed to return to their house-specific desks. The headmaster briefly addressed the approaching first-year cohort before the newcomers entered the Great Hall. Several students had eyes wide with awe, their gazes scanning the castle in admiration and reverence. Among the crowd, Harry noticed Ginny's red head and overheard her chatting with another girl. The young woman wore radish-shaped earrings, something that even he, who lived with what he called extra, land-based, Professor McGonagall called out a name, Colin Crivey, and he snapped out of his reverie when the Sorting Hat shouted Gryffindor. The entire hall erupted in applause for their new companion. He stopped listening to the subsequent announcements until he saw the girl with radish curls approach the Sorting Hat. The girl was named Luna Lovegood, and after barely touching her head, the Sorting Hat exclaimed Sericulture. Naturally, he expected to see Ginny at his house since the whole family had been there before her. However, that didn't happen. When the sorting cup landed on his head, he took a moment before exclaiming snakes. The shock froze the applause as the little redhead approached the snake's table. Suddenly, without warning, the twins stood up and cheered for their sister. Then Harry decided to join them with Ron. Draco gradually moved to a seat beside her, allowing her to settle into her new home. It seemed that no one would accept her until she had proven herself except Draco, Moriana, and Loki. After the seating arrangement, the principal delivered what the students dismissed as utterly pointless remarks. As hunger set in, he concluded his speech, urging them to eat their fill. After everyone finished eating, the headmaster instructed the prefects from each house to escort first-year students back to their dormitories. Meanwhile, older students like Gryffindor House waited for the prefects to announce the new password. They didn't have to wait long, as Percy had already shared the password with the twins during their trip to the castle. The twins then relayed it to Harry, who promptly passed it along to his friends. Fortunately, they remembered the password because Percy had this annoying habit of showing the main routes to dormitories, but he also showed them the classrooms and other similar spots. When the first years returned, they were both mentally and physically drained. Percy showed them where the boys' rooms were and did the same for the girls. Young Stark had time to reunite with his friends, who had slipped away from the teacher's watch and Ruszard's scrutiny. They then gathered in the hall at their favorite meeting spot. The three serpents had alerted Ginny, who had developed a particular fondness for their style of jokes during the summer. While accepting new members for their pranks, particularly twins, they only welcomed those they trusted or who knew each other well. They didn't want to stand out either. If they did, it would draw too much attention and make it harder to escape when needed. In short, they figured Ginny was the last person they'd accept to avoid getting caught or if the teachers found the room on request. After their discussion, which mainly revolved around talking about their vacation plans and future projects, they headed back to their dorms. On the way, Harry came across Yaric strolling quietly through the corridors, completely undetected by Miss Tane, Ruszard's cat. Though the man seemed distracted, Harry remained silent. Eventually, he could finally enjoy a peaceful night's sleep, dreaming of the year ahead. It was decided. Gilderoy Lockhart was the worst fraud they'd ever seen. Their defense against the forces of evil classes turned into torture as their teacher kept talking about himself. Exams were all about his favorite things: his hair color, eye color, where he lived, and other stupid questions that grew more ridiculous with each class. They dreamed of the day they'd finally have a proper class. "Was it you who made Ruszard's pussy stiff?" Tony demanded, locking eyes with his son. "No, I swear it wasn't me. When I arrived at the scene, there was a swarm of spiders fleeing. If you must know, I was with Professor Lockhart and calmly responding to his correspondence when he left me for the rest of the evening. As for his hair, yes, it was really me who dyed it neon green. He deserved that." Harry replied calmly, "Okay, I trust you, but stay careful. The person who did this is still free. Are you with Yaric? Tony asked anxiously about his son. No, he's staying in the dorm to avoid scaring the others. Don't worry. I know how to protect myself, Harry replied with a smile at his father. Tony pulled his son into his arms, hugging him tightly and urging him to stay careful from now on. Harry vowed to his father he'd do his best and bowed to the family, who were equally worried about their young charge. The young Stark needed to move fast and go invisible to avoid being caught by Ruzzard, who was doubling down on his surveillance in the corridors. Fortunately, fortune was on his side, but he knew this couldn't last long. A dark cloud hung over the castle, and he sensed something major was about to unfold in the near future. The next day, the students were buzzing with talk about Miss Tane and who might be the culprit. They all agreed it must be a student, though they couldn't pinpoint the suspect. While regular classes continued as usual, the real drama unfolded in McGonagall's Transfiguration class. Everything seemed smooth at first, until Hermione's curiosity finally got the better of her. She suddenly raised her hand. Mrs. Granger? What's the matter? Asked McGonagall. I was just wondering if you talk about the secret chamber. Hermione blushed slightly, and immediately the class began whispering among themselves. Silence, McGonagall demanded, then turned to Hermione. The Chamber of Secrets was established alongside Hogwarts by Salazar Cresscross, and according to legend, a monster is said to lie dormant within it, awaiting its master's summons. Do you know where the chamber is? Harry asked, raising his hand. No one knows except the Slytherin heir, but they've all vanished, McGonagall replied. Now let's get back to the main topic. Hermione tried to discuss the matter with other teachers, but none were willing to talk about it or they knew nothing about it. During their shared meal, the group decided to meet at their secret hideout to discuss the Chamber of Secrets, though they had to stay extra cautious in the corridors due to heightened security measures. Each house would depart to the base at different times. The Serpents would go first as they were in larger numbers, followed by the Gryffindors, with the 2 house elves arriving last. When the time came, the Serpents rushed to the Hall of Demand and waited for the others to arrive. For the Gryffindors, Hermione had devised a plan to minimize their presence. Harry and Ron, they would take one corridor together and run as quietly and discreetly as possible, while Hermione and Aisha would use another to reach their destination. With this formation, the 4 Gryffindors managed to make it safely to the Hall of Demand, then entered together. They were pleased to see that all the Serpents had made it to their destination as a group. Moriana came from a pureblood family, but her mother raised her while respecting Muggle standards unlike the rest of her clan. Several members had become Death Eaters, having killed countless Muggles. Her family had long been acquainted with the Knots family, as Theodore's father was a former Death Eater like Lucius' father, meaning the 3 had known each other since childhood. When they saw the name, Riddle, they exchanged glances and tried to recall where this name had come from that felt familiar. Unfortunately, their friends cut them off from their thoughts, insisting they return to their dormitories for a good night's sleep to stay in top shape the next day. Unfortunately, whoever was targeting the castle didn't stop at Miss Tane. The following month, they turned their attention to a student. He had just set up a curfew, and Harry was strolling through the corridors when he was forced back to his dormitory. There, he spotted a student lying face down in a puddle. At first, he wondered why the student was lying there, but when he tried to wake him up by touching him, he realized something was seriously wrong. He was on his way to find a teacher when he saw Ruzzard arrive and immediately escorted him straight to the principal's office. Before reaching the principal's office, the teachers had already learned that a student had been assaulted and taken the victim to the infirmary. When they finally arrived, the faculty members were already in the principal's office, with some asking what Harry was doing there. Director, I found the student at the crime scene and he was there when my cat got petrified. We have our guilty. I'll personally punish him, said Ruzzard, brimming with pride. You'll never lay a finger on my son. Whether it's the director or you, Tony threatened Ruzzard. I believe in my son's innocence. You're not the one to decide what happens to Harry, Mr. Stark, Dumbledore replied, his eyes losing all their cheerfulness. Harry, did you, yes or no, petrify Miss Tane and Justin? None. That wasn't me, Harry replied, terrified. I believe Mr. Stark, Minerva argued. The Chamber of Secrets can only be opened by a descendant of Slytherin, his true heir. I doubt Mr. Stark is the heir to Slytherin. There's only one surefire way to find out, the director asked gently. Harry, I think I remember you did a bloodline test. Can we check it out if possible? The Starks exchanged glances. Harry noticed the worry in his father's eyes, then almost reluctantly handed him back the family tree. For a moment, he felt completely surrounded by people who might hate him, and then he began to wonder why he hadn't burned his tree, then kept it as a memento of what he'd read. He wondered how he could have such a slim chance as his own. He wished he could sink 6 feet into the ground to avoid future questions, but unfortunately, he knew nothing about that sort of thing. Strangely enough, the last thing the director asked him was exactly what he needed. Harry, you can go back to your dorm. You're no longer needed here, the director said, his smile lingering. Yet Harry's eyes betrayed a quiet sadness that the director couldn't read. Though he wanted to ask if he'd be expelled, young Stark did exactly what the principal told him and went back to his dorm where his friends were waiting. He told them that the teachers doubted he was guilty because of his ancestor, and feeling more alone than ever, he began to sob silently. Hermione tried to reassure him, saying he wasn't the guilty party, but he knew all the evidence was against him. Within weeks, several events unfolded. Harry's family was being phased out, and the dueling club was about to open soon. The principal had decided that opening the club would help students prepare for another attack. The club would be co-taught by Professor Snape, who had returned as the castle's most ruthless teacher, and Professor Fraud No. 1. On this weekend's final day, the first class was held for second-year students eager to join, with none of them wanting to miss out on the action. That evening, all the second-year students rushed excitedly to the duel arena. With everyone so hyped up, no one could spot Harry stepping into the ring either. Since the brief period between Justin's petrification and this day, the entire school had learned that Harry was the descendant of a Slytherin who had been disowned. Initially, no one dared to touch him due to his father's reputation at school, but after his expulsion, some students began publicly insulting him. However, no one dared to do so in Loki's presence, as he would attack them with magic and always ended up holding back at the end of his spells. Young Stark turned his attention to what his teachers were saying. They explained that each student would face a disarmament challenge. 2 students chosen by the teachers would have to duel, with the first to disarm declared the loser. For a demonstration, Gilderoy and Professor Snape clashed in less than a second, as the trick was defused in the blink of an eye. They asked if there were any volunteers willing to try it out, but none of the students volunteered, so they each randomly selected a student. Gilderoy, who remembered Harry's joke, chose to get even by picking young Stark to duel him. Meanwhile, Professor Snape picked Grigory Goyle, a brute who couldn't count but knew how to hurt others. The hall fell silent as Goyle and Harry locked eyes. Each made a brief bow to announce the duel start. Then both drew their wands. Harry attempted to cast the disarming spell but failed. Goyle, trying to frighten Harry, shouted Serpent Sortia, and a snake much larger than Yaric emerged from the brute's wand. Immediately, the familiar hiss of the forked tongue rang out, and he clearly heard the words of the serpent. Well, I'm hungry and there are several humans I could eat. They're pretty small for me, especially this one, the snake said, staring intently at Seamus Finnegan. No, you won't harm anyone. Leave him alone, Harry shouted as he ordered the dangerous snake. A speaker, the snake exclaimed. Before he could finish his sentence, Professor Snape crushed the serpent to ashes. Young Stark stood frozen, his mouth agape as the serpent vanished, though he could hear its desperate pleas that tugged at his heartstrings. The potions master called on the trembling students to return to their dormitories, with Seamus appearing the most shaken of all. When Harry heard the professor's call, he rushed out of the classroom and made his way to the Hall of Requests, where he found his friends waiting for him. Each of them told him not to worry, but Harry sensed his friends were getting carried away in their sweet talk. He couldn't wait for the rest of the year to end it, burned with a burning desire for everything to be over. This was undoubtedly the worst year of his life. First came Lockhart, who knew nothing. Then came the students who were petrified. Eventually, he couldn't walk through the school corridors without classmates whispering behind his back. Most feared him so much that they went to great lengths to avoid provoking him. Honestly, the young Stark was fed up with it all, just because of his own minor mistake and the revelation of his heritage. In the past week, everything happened faster than he ever imagined. Flashback. It had been a full day since the duel club incident that had led to its unfortunate closure. The students began looking at Harry with fear in their eyes, and most stopped speaking to him. However, this day paled in comparison to the following one, as he not only saw fearful glances but also noticed some girls breaking down in tears upon seeing him. The classroom remained the same until the situation finally reached a breaking point, with young Stark erupting into genuine anger. Harry was undergoing a metamorphosis with Professor McGonagall, and the whole class tried to avoid him, even his closest friends. Unable to bear the terrified and prying gazes of his classmates, Harry got up from his chair and walked out of the classroom. He heard McGonagall's shouts echoing through the hall as he left. She urged him to return to class, but seeing young Stark's desperate look and the other students' stares, she let him go. He vented his frustration on the mannequins provided by La Salle sur Demand, endlessly. He used the disarmament spell so often that he knew it like the back of his hand. He tried to see if he could do it without his cane, and to his great surprise, the spell worked flawlessly. However, he realized that practicing magic without his wand was extremely draining, so he decided to temporarily stop training and discreetly made his way back to the Gryffindor dormitories. To his astonishment, he found his friends waiting in the Gryffindor common room. He froze in shock for a moment, but quickly regained his composure to unleash his fury at his best friends. Hermione, caught off guard by Harry's outburst, broke down in tears while Aisha trembled in her arms. Ron, who had remained calm throughout, waited until Harry finished yelling at them before gently soothing his friend back into control. He explained to his best friend that Dumbledore had asked them to keep their distance from him, but after witnessing how everyone treated him, they realized ignoring him wasn't the best solution. He explained that others were afraid of him because Lockhart, who had accidentally revealed Harry's inheritance during his first class after the incident, had made them nervous. At this critical moment, Harry found a new reason to despise their so-called professor. He apologized to his friends for shouting at them and went to comfort Aisha, who was still trembling. But he couldn't understand why the principal had asked his classmates to ignore him.
Fin flashback.
Even after a week, Harry still couldn't grasp why Dumbledore was acting this way. To his relief, McGonagall hadn't held him back for sneaking out during class. Yet he knew all too well that running away would make him look cowardly, and Gryffindor students were known for their naive courage in dangerous situations. In the end, the month passed without any incidents, except for the growing fear Harry felt among other students. With only 3 weeks left until Christmas break, Harry was eager to return home and reunite with his family. These 3 weeks were far from peaceful for the young Stark, who was beginning to grow tired of the terrified looks from other students. He was glad to have his best friends by his side, but he just wanted to walk down a hallway without anyone crying in his wake. He couldn't have the comforting presence of his snake anymore, which had grown exponentially during his school stay. The headmaster had asked Harry to take it home to avoid scaring other students. The young Stark didn't get a chance to respond, fearing retaliation. He had asked Yaric to stay out of his way while he was away. He wrote a letter to his parents explaining that Yaric couldn't stay with him anymore, and handed it to his loyal snake, who vowed not to harm anyone. Now that it was time for him to go home, he was worried about his parents' reaction when he had to explain his situation at school. He hoped everything would go smoothly and that they would understand the situation without making a big fuss. He was one of the first to secure a seat in the train with his friends, as they didn't want to make a scene publicly, especially when the station was about to fill up. They were lucky to have arrived before everyone else. When they finally settled down, they could relax and chat about their classes and spells they'd learned. However, Harry didn't show them how to cast spells without a wand. Figured it would spark too many questions and wanted to keep it under wraps. Before long, most of them started making their own moves, while Ron and Draco dove into a wizard versus wizard showdown. Both were pros at the game, and most of their matches ended in draws. Meanwhile, Harry dozed off by the window as his two friends were reduced to their third straight draw. He was awakened by Loki, who, according to Draco and Ron, had entered their compartment shortly after he dozed off and kept watch over him with a protective gaze throughout the journey. Loki and Harry disembarked together from the train. Young Stark bid farewell to his friends before setting out to search for his parents. Accompanied by the demigod, they found them near the entrance, just like during their last summer vacation, and set off together for New York in the Stark family's private jet. Upon arriving in New York, Pepper hosted a lavish dinner worthy of the gods to celebrate Harry's return home. The gathering included his godfather, Natasha with Clint, Thor who was determined to welcome his little brother and Steve. Though delighted to see everyone, Tony felt uneasy about sharing details about school life since it had been ages since their last letter. As they settled into the living room, Tony immediately asked Harry how things were going at school. "Everything's going great. We're having a blast. We're learning so much," Harry said with a smile. "Are you sure what you're saying?" Tony asked skeptically at his son's words. "Ooh, absolutely certain, Dad," Harry replied, stumped for words. "Is Loki telling the truth?" Tony asked skeptically. "I'm sorry, Harry, but I'm worried. You haven't written us in weeks, so I need to know what's really going on. Please, Loki, tell us the whole story." When Loki saw the eyes of the oldest Stark, he knew he had to tell the truth to everyone for his little protégé's sake. "Sorry, Harry, but this is for your own good," Loki said to Harry before turning to Tony. "It all started shortly after you left school." Loki recounted the events at school, and the more he spoke, the more his family's reactions diverged. In the end, Tony was furious at the student's behavior. Pepper was crying and had taken Harry into her arms halfway through the story. Bruce was doing his best to keep the Hulk from breaking out. Thor summoned a storm outside, while Clint and Steve tried to calm their angry friends. Loki slowly calmed his brother to prevent any damage outside. Natasha wore a frosty expression, but only those who truly knew her could detect the dangerous gleam in her eyes. A promise of excruciating, slow death to anyone who dared approach her. As for young Stark, he struggled to comfort his tearful mother. The millionaire finally composed himself and told his son he wouldn't return to Hogwarts for the rest of the year, if not for his life. He couldn't believe his ears. He had been trying to keep his situation secret from his family to prevent it from happening. Now his father refused to let him return to Hogwarts. He felt utterly devastated, betrayed by Loki, who had been his closest friend, the one he confided in when he couldn't bring himself to tell his parents. Yet, this didn't stop Harry from fighting to get back to his prestigious Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "Harry, why did you lie to us?" Pepper asked, frustrated by his son's attitude. "Because I want to go back to Hogwarts," the young boy replied. "Yeah, I get you wanting to go back to Hogwarts, but why would you want to go back after all that they've done to you?" Pepper asked. "I want to go back because I have this bad feeling that people are going to die if I don't do something," Harry replied, looking embarrassed. "Okay, you can go back for the rest of the year and we'll see how it goes after that. Okay?" Pepper said with a smile at his son. As for, "Hey there, you need to stop being so melodramatic and start taking into account our son's wishes." "But Peps, he could get hurt or even killed," Tony replied, determined not to face the possibility of his son being left dead or injured for the rest of his life. "I know," he replied, "but I trust him to pull through no matter what." Pepper had regained the strength to believe in his son. Tony ultimately gave up, though he had desperately tried to keep his son from returning to school. Despite the protests from both Harry and Pepper, he initially resisted, but when he saw the look on his son and daughter-in-law's faces, he smiled and reluctantly agreed to let Harry go back. A few days later, they received an invitation from the Malfoys for their Christmas party. The invitation came from Draco, who only invited Harry, his parents, and Loki since he was the Norse mythology's demigod of magic. They accepted the invitation and, along with his family, Harry celebrated Christmas earlier, much to Tony's delight. To everyone's surprise, Loki received his own invitation, and an invitation. Surely Draco had told his parents that Loki was the god of magic. They arrived at the party earlier than planned because Tony wanted to meet the Malfoys in person. Despite Draco's comments about his parents and how they treated them at the station, Tony wasn't going to be intimidated by Draco's family. The eldest Stark firmly believed the Malfoys had sent him a letter to prove they were superior to the Starks. Unfortunately, The Malfoys had no idea what they'd created before their Christmas party began. A house elf came to open the door of the Grand Manor and showed them the way to the living room where the guests would spend the evening. They entered and were greeted by the head of the Malfoy family, Lucius, and his wife Narcissa. When he saw who the first guests were, Draco rushed to meet his friend's family and reintroduce them to his parents. "Father, Mother," Draco said respectfully, "I present to you the Stark family. Anthony, Virginia, and Harrison, along with Loki Lawfeason. Welcome to Malfoy Manor. I'm Lucius Malfoy, this is my wife Narcissa Malfoy, and you must already know Draco," Lucius said with a haughty air and a hint of disdain. "Yeah, we already know him. Thanks for the invitation. I hope our presence won't be too much of a bother," Tony replied with a mischievous grin. Lucius, with a sneer, invited the Starks into his parlor and began chatting among themselves, leaving the youngsters to themselves. Draco smiled at his two friends and led them further away from the adults for privacy, both for their own safety and their parents'. While they discussed among themselves, curiosity got the better of them. They overheard their parents. Tony was facing Lucius directly, while Pepper stood opposite Narcissa. The two women seemed thoroughly annoyed by their husband's behavior. "Oh, you own 2 manors, huh? You must be rich," said Tony with a sly grin. "Naturally. Of course, a wizard of my caliber could easily afford 2 or more, but I wanted to give other wizards the chance to acquire manors themselves," Lucius replied proudly. "Then, Mr. Stark, do you have the means to buy a manor? Is it possible for a muggle to purchase one?" "No, only the wealthiest muggles can afford a manor, much like your economic system. You've got a gorgeous manor right here," Tony said with a feigned wistful tone. "Oh, what a shame for you. How did your son manage to get into Hogwarts? Only real wizards can enter that place," demanda Lucius. "What are you trying to imply here, Mr. Malfoy?" Tony asked, his playful tone fading from his voice. "Her mother was a bloodline witch, and you're a muggle," Lucius sneered with a sly grin. "But even if her mother was just some pathetic excuse for a witch, it shouldn't be the only gene that slipped into him." The 3 boys in hiding watched Tony's expression, and Harry was convinced that Draco's father wouldn't survive their conversation alive. "You know, Mr. Malfoy, I've been very polite with you about our boys' friendship, but I will never tolerate anyone who insults my family," Tony, the eldest Malfoy, threatened. "What can you do against me? You're just a nobody, while I'm one of the most powerful and wealthy wizards in this world." Lucius responded with an air of superiority. "That's exactly what you think. Think twice before threatening my family," Tony said. They called it off mid-conversation, mainly because guests were flooding into the manor demanding attention from its owner. Harry was glad Draco had managed to invite Hermione and Ron. Lucius had called Hermione a muggle-born and Ron a blood traitor, but unfortunately, only Ron made it to the party, while Hermione's parents stayed with the Starks. All their friends were present, along with a few Slytherins that Draco's father had invited to the family gathering, including the Parkinsons, Goyle, Crabbe, and Flint. Of course, when the invitation was sent to the Higgs family, it included Moriana and Terence, a Slytherin cousin of Moriana's. The Selwyn family was, though also invited. The family actually consisted of Heinrich and his brother, who was the lord of their family. Loki had already told Harry that their parents had been killed during the war against Voldemort. Although Loki had a hard time making friends, he did manage to befriend Heinrich and his best friend Jacob Blade. The children and teenagers had their own dedicated table, leaving adults free to enjoy themselves as they pleased. The other serpents desperately tried to catch Draco's attention, since their parents were eager to win the Malfoy family's favor. To their dismay, not only did they fail to attract his interest, but they also provoked him because Draco wanted to spend quality time with his friends. "Okay, you're gonna leave me alone, right? I'm trying to have fun with my friends," shouted Draco. "Go on, Draco, admit Idiori not their real friend. We grew up with you. We've known you since we were babies. You're superior to them, just like us. Join your rightful place among the true Serpentards, and your father won't have to give up his inheritance," cried Pansy Parkinson, her voice thick with self-righteousness. "Enough. I'm fed up hearing you say I don't belong among my own friends. You've never considered me friends. All you want is a higher social status than my real friends. I can act however I want, and nobody tells me what to do. I don't care about being banned from my own house. I hate acting like I'm superior to others. Now, leave me alone, cried Draco in the purebloods. Unfortunately, the adults intrigued by the young boy's shouts were drawn to the scene, and Lucius had been in the front row watching his son despise his status as a pureblood. On the spot, the eldest Malfoy banished his son from the family, while Draco went to his room to pack his bags. The invited guests left one by one, except for the Higgs family members, despite Mariah's desire to leave with Draco. The Starks waited for Draco and set off together. The only one who regretted his departure was Narcissa, who harbored deep resentment towards Lucius for banishing him in front of everyone without any real feelings. Draco is your son. How could you do something like that to him? Narcissa cried, her voice breaking with tears. My son. This disgusting creature was nothing like the heir I raised. If you want to join him, that doesn't bother me at all. Lucius retorted, disgusted by how his wife spoke to him. Perfect. I hope you'll regret it later, Narcissa said as she set off to search for her son. Patriarch Malfoy continued his Christmas revelry, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife had just left him and would never return. The guests congratulated Lucius for kicking out his ungrateful son and his detestable wife, while Moriana was thoroughly disgusted by the so-called nobles surrounding her. The moment Narcissa stepped out of her ex-husband's mansion, she immediately sought shelter and couldn't stop thinking about the gurgling cauldron. After renting a room, she collapsed onto her bed and burst into tears. When her father had arranged her marriage to Lucius, she'd believed everything would work out perfectly, that he'd be a good husband and father. But when Draco learned to speak and walk, Lucius began his training to become a respectable heir for the Malfoy family. He had beaten their son several times to make him understand better, as Lucius put it. She wanted to report him to the authorities because she couldn't stand how he treated Draco, and he also possessed an impressive collection of dark artifacts. She knew he remained one of the most loyal Mangemorts to the Lord of Darkness, and she constantly feared him. She didn't want to escalate the situation for her son without his presence, however. Now that Draco had been permanently banished from the family, she could leave without fear for her young son and go to report on his actions. Draco's ex-husband at the Ministry of Magic. She knew he was with the Stark family and wasn't afraid they might harm her, since she'd discussed his friends with him and Harry had been one of the first to leave. When Stark and Draco fled together, far from the manor, they immediately headed straight for Harry's manor, and Draco's request led them to summon Severus. Upon learning he was the godfather of Draco, Severus agreed to take him in, knowing exactly what Lucius had been doing to his godson. While he was processing the paperwork, Draco would stay at Harry's manor. When Severus returned to Harry's manor, he brought Draco's mother along. Draco was at a loss for words. Never imagined Severus would take him along. But his mother showed remarkable patience, patiently answering all his unspoken questions. Don't worry, Draco. I'm not here to drag you back to your father. I'm proud that you stood up for him. I am so proud of you, my little dragon, Narcissa said with a smile at her son. But how? Mother, why aren't you with father? Draco asked seriously, confused. I've wanted to divorce you for a long time, but I never had the guts to leave you. Even if we'd fought in court for custody, he'd still have won. All I've ever done was protect you, Narcissa said, pulling her son into her arms. I don't mean any harm to you. Draco, who had been holding back his emotions since leaving the Malfoy manor, returned to his mother and began sobbing on her shoulder. Narcissa explained to her son that they would stay with Severus and take his birth name. With their money gone, all belonging to Lucius, she was about to return to work. Tony had offered to give them a little extra. She wanted to keep the silver until she was done with it, but she refused. She already felt deeply grateful to the Starks for keeping her little dragon. She didn't want to rely on them anymore. With just a few days left before returning to Hogwarts, Draco was staying with Severus and his mother. The day finally arrived when they had to return to the castle. Harry no longer feared going back, knowing his friends would support him and he wouldn't feel alone. Moreover, if he could no longer bear it, he would ask. His father's decision to leave Hogwarts move his friends wouldn't approve of, but he was certain they'd get it. The two boys set off to find Ginny, but they found themselves facing a new circular door. Harry ordered the door to open, and the two waited until it was fully open, which took a solid 2 minutes. As time ran out, Harry and Loki finally saw the door fully open. They dashed toward the back when they spotted a man hovering above Ginny, clutching a newspaper in his arms. Young Stark lunged at the man, knocking him down while Loki watched in bewilderment. "Harry Potter, it's a pleasure to see you here with me. Who are you?" the man asked Loki. "Loki," he still replied with puzzlement. "Who are you? I'm convinced I've already sensed your presence somewhere." "Loki, like the Norse god?" the man asked. "The only one and only. Now politeness demands that you take your turn to introduce yourself." Demanda Loki zutn't the man in front of him. "My name is Tom McGonagall Riddle, but you can also know me by the pseudonym Lord Voldemort." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Loki, though I thought you were more mature," Tom replied with a smile to the demigod, then turned to Harry. "And you, child who destroyed me in my glory? I'll destroy you after I return to life." Harry was in a trance when the man he had been searching for, his grandfather, now appeared before him, the Lord of Darkness Voldemort. The only person who could help his mother was the one most desperate to destroy her. Without a word, Tom ordered them killed at the Basilica and arrogantly declared to Harry that the Basilica would only heed the heir of Salazar Slytherin. Tom certainly didn't realize that the young Stark was also a descendant and heir of Slytherin. The sole and final heir of Slytherin couldn't understand why the Basilica was listening to someone other than him. "Mr. Riddle, who was Lillian Riddle?" Harry asked softly. "How do you know this name? Why do you want to know?" Tom asked. The last trace of color in his face had vanished along with his smile. "Because it would be my mother," the young Stark replied softly, "and when he looks at me, all he can remember is Lily Potter. Lillian. She was the joy of my wife and myself. Rose was absolutely thrilled about carrying our child after multiple attempts. We were 30 years old at that time." Flashback. A 20-year-old Tom Riddle found himself alone in a pub. He had just discovered his father was a muggle, and when he confronted him, the young man was enraged by his wizard identity. In a fit of rage, he killed him along with his grandparents. Now he deeply regretted taking their lives. It was during his third drink that he encountered her. She was sitting alone in a corner, looking visibly uneasy. The heir of Slytherin approached her and asked why she was alone in the bar. She explained she had come with her best friend and her boyfriend's ex, who had left shortly after. As she spoke, he began to gaze deeply into her eyes. Her deep brown hair sparkled with orange highlights, but her eyes were truly magnificent, a pair of emerald-like orbs that could rival any jade. Tom fell head over heels for her at first sight and asked to meet up later. She laughed, saying she didn't know his name, and he realized he didn't know hers either. She introduced herself as Rosemary Malfoy. He knew Abraxas Malfoy by name for his social status, but he didn't know she had children or that she wasn't actually his sister. A single appointment turned into 2, then 10, and finally Rosemary introduced him to her family. Earlier, she had introduced him to her brother Abraxas, because she didn't get along well with her parents. Abraxas was overjoyed for his sister and blessed the young couple, which he could do since he had become Lord Malfoy after his father retired. They married shortly afterward and invited Abraxas and his wife, a bloodline approved by their father. They tried for years to conceive a child, but nothing worked out, leaving the young couple in despair, especially after Lucius, Abraxas' son, was born. Then, finally, a year later, their wish came true. Rosemary became pregnant, and Tom was overjoyed. He even applied for a teaching position at Hogwarts, but Dumbledore rejected the offer, which left Tom somewhat upset. Soon after, their little girl was born, and everything seemed perfect until the day Rosemary came home and told him Lillian had vanished. At that moment, he descended into an endless rage and became Voldemort, hoping to one day reunite with Lillian. Even when this involved the deaths of multiple people, he began to blame the light. His wife died a few years later from a mold-related disease called cancer. No one could save her. He even tried the Muggle healers to save her, but their treatments ultimately killed her. He severed all ties with the Malfoys until Lucius joined him in his war against Dumbledore, yet he never admitted to being married to his deceased aunt.
Fin flashback.
"You want me to believe you're the son of my kidnapped daughter and that I killed her myself?" Tom asked, his voice tinged with sorrow. Why did he tell us his story? Loki demanded irritably, but no one would listen. So my mother was actually Lily Potter? Harry asked cheerfully. Hey, Loki kept getting irritated. I can't believe it. I have a grandson and I tried to kill you too.
I'm sorry, Harry.
If I'd known, said Tom, as he approached Harry. It's not a big deal. It wasn't your fault. I'm just glad to have a grandfather, even though you're no longer alive and tried to kill all the Muggleborns at Hogwarts, plus Ginny. Hey, I shouldn't have done this, he said, his voice trembling with regret. I was young then, having just lost my only daughter and beloved wife. My anger clouded my judgment. He turned to Tom, who had genuinely regretted causing so much pain. Hey, that's right. I'm sure they'll understand. Harry asked in confusion. But how do you even explain this? You're not real, are you? Hey, yes and no. What you see now is just my mind. To become real, I must find my physical body again, Tom replied. Hey, but what about Ginny? What's going to happen to her? Harry asked anxiously, worried about his best friend's sister. Hey, don't worry. She's just being affected by the black magic that's messing with the newspaper. Hey, is this over? Right? Harry doesn't trust him. He tried to kill you 2 seconds ago, and he still wants to. I refuse to let you get close to him, whether you're smart or not. If he'd hurt you, I'd never forgive him, not myself. Not even you. Take Ginny and we're leaving. Before Harry could respond, Loki grabbed Ginny and Harry and rushed them out of the chamber as fast as possible. Harry had barely managed to grab Tom's journal when he saw his grandfather vanish into thin air. He also heard the Basilica's apology, but couldn't disobey his master's orders no matter what they were. Once outside, Loki slammed the door shut and threw Harry to the ground, his eyes blazing with menace. The young Stark noticed their teachers were present and seemed displeased that students had decided to resolve what they deemed an impossible situation. At this moment, Dumbledore instructed the teachers to transport the injured students to the infirmary, while others returned to their dormitories until he called for them to leave the room to TO the young ones. Their headmaster seemed calm, but those who truly knew him could see the light had vanished from his eyes. He must have been furious with the children and himself for failing to stop them from entering the classroom. Harry tried to explain, but Dumbledore glared at him with such hatred that the young Stark McGonagall professor shut down the situation and followed it through to the infirmary with Ginny, Ron, Draco, and Loki. McGonagall led them to Mrs. Pomfrey, where she first treated Ginny, who was in the worst condition, then examined the 4 boys. She tended to Ron and Harry's minor injuries before telling McGonagall they could return to their dormitories. When they did, the professor dismissed them without uttering a single word to them. Harry thought she must have been furious, since she usually reprimanded students openly when they faced punishment from the headmaster. But this time, she appeared unusually calm and composed. She first escorted Loki and Draco to the entrance of the Slytherin dormitories, then guided Ron and Harry to their own dormitories. The 2 boys rushed to their beds, fully aware they would be punished sooner or later. The next day, the director announced that the crisis was over and everything would return to normal. Unfortunately, the group wasn't allowed to leave their rooms or communicate with each other. The only people who weren't, the 3 girls Hermione, Ginny, and Aisha were trapped inside because Hermione had been petrified. Ginny had been the victim, and Aisha hadn't helped them since she was by Hermione's side. Of course, all 3 girls had been warned not to speak with any of their friends except among themselves shortly after Hermione became petrified. Less than 2 weeks later, the group was summoned to the director's office and required to arrive immediately. When Harry entered the office, he saw the directors of Gryffindor, Slytherin, and Hufflepuff houses, all their parents, along with Professor Dumbledore and his friends accompanied by their families. For the first time in his life, Harry feared losing everything, friends and family, all because of a simple mistake. His father's face was terrifyingly grim, the fury in his eyes so intense it paralyzed him, while his mother turned as pale as a sheet, something he'd never seen them like before. Dumbledore's eyes still held that same glimmer of hope, though it hadn't returned yet. Harry, it's very kind of you to reach out to us. Now we can begin this discussion. Mr. Stark, Mr. Weasley, Mr. Black, and Mr. Lawfison, by entering the Chamber of Secrets alone, you've violated several school rules. You've put your lives and those of your classmates at great risk. I hope you understand the gravity of the situation and your own circumstances. While I'd like to say everything will work out, that would be an understatement. First off, we're deducting 100 points from each of you, plus Mr. Dudley, Mrs. Higgs, Mr. Knott, Mrs. and Mr. Marks. You'll have detention every weekend until the end of next year from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. For Mr. Stark, Mr. Weasley, Mr. Black, and Mr. Lawfeson, we're weighing suspension for next year or expulsion. But before we make a decision, we'd like to hear your parents' opinions. Mrs. Black, would you like to start? Dumbledore said very seriously. I'd rather Draco stay at Hogwarts, Narcissa said, her shoulders stiffening as she clutched her son's shoulders. Though he behaved in an unacceptable manner, she agreed to a suspension and some detention. Her face turned paler than usual as she glared at her own son. Molly and I agree with Mrs. Black, especially since we can't send Ronald to another school, Arthur said, staring hard at his son. Ron knew he was in for the biggest scolding of his life at home. After our conversation, Pepper and I agreed Harry should leave the school. Too many things have happened there, and I don't trust you to protect my son from attacks inside this castle. Whether he gets expelled or not, he won't come back unless we decide otherwise. Tony replied, ignoring his son's protests and his friend's furious stares. But when they saw Father Stark's furious look, they all fell silent. My brother is free to make his own choice, but I'd recommend expelling him since he was only there for Harry, Thor replied, being the only one not angry at anyone. So it's decided, Mr. Weasley, Lawfeson and Black will be suspended with the same disciplinary measures as the others, while under Mr. Stark's request, Harry will be expelled. However, if Mr. Strong decides otherwise, Dumbledore declared, Harry will be able to return to Hogwarts for the remaining years. With that, I wish you all a pleasant evening and hope you learn your lesson, young ones. After everyone had left, Dudley stayed behind and asked the headmaster if he could leave school on his own to follow his cousin. The headmaster agreed and told Dudley that he was still welcome at Hogwarts if he ever wanted to return. Harry was completely shocked by his parents' decision. He had finally managed to meet one of his grandparents, but he had to. Loki stepped in. Now he had to leave Hogwarts, and he didn't know if there were magic schools in America. This felt truly unfair to him. He also had to leave his friends behind, not knowing if they'd meet again later or if they'd stay friends. He knew Loki would follow him wherever he went, but he didn't want to take away the friends he'd made at the castle. Unfortunately, his father seemed determined to force him out of school without his consent, and he knew no one could persuade him otherwise. When it came to his son's safety, Tony became more protective than a mother trying to shield her cubs from danger. He decided to consult Hermione, who always had the perfect answer for anything. She would be the best person to tell him if there was a magic school in the United States. To his great surprise, there was one in New York, but she told him there weren't dormitories for all students. Since she also took many students from across the United States, those who had a place to stay had to return to school every morning and leave again each evening with transportation that came to pick them up. She also told him that the school was visible to everyone, but since it was a private institution, only wizards could enter. He learned he could practice magic in his house for training, unless some muggle who knew nothing about magic saw him doing it. He asked his father if he could attend the New York Magic School. Though initially worried, Tony agreed but had to promise Harry not to cause any trouble at the school and ensure it was safe. Young Stark nearly jumped for joy. The end of classes came too soon for his liking. Learned Dudley would join him in New York, staying with his family until he reached adulthood. The group had promised to meet again someday during the summer break, and Harry vowed to convince his parents to return to Hogwarts. His father had bought him a beautiful owl named Hufflepuff and named it Hedwig. He said, "What a magnificent name for such a magnificent owl." His friends laughed, and the owl seemed pleased with the name. With Hedwig, he could communicate with he stayed with friends all the time, no matter how far apart they were, since she had been dragged along to deliver letters. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. They had to return home for summer vacation, and Harry had never felt so sad about leaving his friends like this. But Dudley and Loki were by his side now. Though their relationship with the first had started poorly, he couldn't imagine life without them as both a friend and brother. In truth, All his friends were his brothers and sisters. Nothing could separate them except the slight distance between them. He had seen his sisters weep, though Moriana and Angela remained only saddened by his departure. Despite Theo's protests, he still gave hugs to his brothers, who eventually agreed. Theo had come to appreciate Harry and the others as a second familia sentiment shared by every single one of them.